Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Night has fallen and the most rambunctious dogs have fallen silent. The lights in the windows of the houses have gone out. Silence. A tension hung in the air. Only occasionally, somewhere in the lilac bushes, a night bird, breaking the complete silence. Anna, still a young woman of about 30 years old, sat on the porch of her house and gazed into the night sky. And there shone such stars which are only in August. It seemed as if someone had scattered grains across the sky. It was cold. Anna ate, lived, and drew back more tightly into a light shawl. Yes, summer is gone, soon to be cleaned up by rains and then by frost. Sad and painful. But the pain on Anna's soul is not from the changes of nature, but from the fact that she was left all alone. It had been 40 days since she had buried her beloved husband. Anna looked at the stars and remembered how she and Michael used to sit on the porch at night like that, and the sky above them was the same. Sometimes they'd see a shooting star. Michael always managed to make a wish, but she didn't. Then her husband laughed at her, saying, "Your wishes are too long." She could have wished for something simpler. How could it be simpler? She just wanted a child. But it wasn't meant to be. With her husband, they lived almost 10 years, and all this time they dreamed of becoming parents. The doctors gave them some diagnosis, prescribed additional examinations, and all in vain. Anna and Michael even went to the capital to the luminaries of medicine. And they didn't help. Anna remembered how she sat waiting for the results of the tests, how nervous she was. The result was the same: infertility. And sometimes it seemed like she was going crazy. Sometimes she would walk down the street and peek in her stroller. She loved looking at those angels so much. She imagined that like that herself would one day walk with a stroller. But fate was inexorable. She was barren. Michael once mentioned that maybe he could take a baby from the orphanage, but Anna resisted. She honestly admitted to her husband that she could not love someone else's child. Yes, she likes to admire children, but she can't bear to take care of one she didn't give birth to. She cannot cross that line of squeamishness, which the birth mother does not even think about, because it does not exist for her. Michael understood his wife and did not insist anymore. So they lived in their village, a good life, I must say. Michael was a hardy farmer. Anna worked in the village library, where they moved immediately after marriage. And in general, they were both city dwellers in the village by chance. It's just that when they got married, Michael's business in town was in trouble. He had a small auto store, and it was bringing in a decent income. And then the recession hit. And then Michael realized he was starting to run his business at a loss. And then Anna's grandmother died in the village and they left her a house. Grandma Olia had lived in Marginov all her life. It was her mother's paternal grandmother, a nice old lady. She was very worried about her death, and her husband consoled her. His support was very important at the funeral. Michael looked around the countryside, talked to the locals at the wake, and realized that there was a free niche for farming. But they didn't know how to use anything and wanted to sell it all. Would someone buy it? So Michael bought the shares by selling his business in town. Then he took a loan and started to develop in the village. Anna supported her husband. As a child, she liked to stay with her grandmother in the village. And secretly, she always dreamed of a quiet life away from the noise of the city. Of course, Michael and Anna's parents did not understand the children, but they did not ask them. It was only over the years that it became clear that Michael had done everything right. He was able to restore what had been destroyed for years. The machine yard was equipped with modern machinery, and the current during the harvesting season was humming day and night. So much so that the whole village could hear it. But nobody grumbled. On the contrary, people rejoiced. After all, now there is work in the village for them, and all thanks to Michael. Michael had a lot of energy. Only here on Earth, he suddenly realized that business does not necessarily have to be done in the city. In the village, too, everything can work out quite well. Next to Anna's hut and grandmother, he built a good house. Together with his wife, planted a garden. After the farm, Michael planned to develop one more thing: to plant an orchard, so that not only apples and cherries grew in it, but also apricots, pears, Grapes learned to rattle his garden for the whole region, and maybe even further. For this, Michael began to study horticulture. For hours, he could sit reading special literature. He even has a huge corner for this in an old shed. It was converted into a study. There was a light and a chair at the table, and even a stove. For the period of cold weather, Anna was perplexed about it. Is there not enough space in the house to make an office there? Everything is more comfortable. But Michael laughed in response. So he is closer to nature, which he studies. He laughed, but Anna asked him not to go into that very shed, saying that he had books and records there. Anna would suddenly start cleaning and confuse everything. In short, in Michael's absence, the shed was always locked. The wife was not offended. She understood that it is not necessary to distract her husband from his new ideas. And Michael, after the main work, all read and read books for gardeners. Several times went to the nursery of the region for a consultation. He was already halfway to his next dream. He's even drawn up a plot of land for a future garden, and everything would have worked out, except for one thing. That tragic evening, Michael had a bad backache. During the day, he helped the men unload sacks of cement into the cowsheds. The floor needed a touch-up in one place. The man thought he was just working. He was tired of carrying sacks, and they scolded him. That's why he grabs every job. There are hired laborers who get paid for it. Michael just waved him off, saying, "How could I not help as fast as I could? All the more rain on the nettles the cement could dip us." They only sighed, then put an anesthetic cream on my husband's back and got ready for the bedroom. Michael said he would work a little longer. I wanted to buy a new combine for the farm, and there was a chance to get into a program where you can do it with benefits. But you have to gather a lot of documents. So Michael was making sure all the paperwork was in order. You don't take care of yourself at all. Anna shook her head. Your work isn't going anywhere until morning. I'll just sit here for a while. Michael smiled weakly and wrinkled his nose. But my back hurts. Let's go to bed. I'll just sit up for half an hour. Her husband promised her, and she left. Then she berated herself for not waiting for Michael. Maybe she could have helped. But that night she only touched the pillow and fell fast asleep. She was tired too. With the house and the library, she had enough on her mind. In the morning, she opened her eyes and a strange anxiety gripped her heart. Michael wasn't there. Had he been working all night? Probably fell asleep in the living room on the sofa. What kind of a dream is that? He'd be like a plague all day. She got out of bed, went to the living room. Michael was lying face down on the floor. At the first second, Anna thought that he was sleeping like that, and then she felt as if she had been electrocuted. It was unnatural. She rushed to her husband and froze, and he was already swinging lice. They screamed. Then Anna screamed like a woman. Her neighbors heard her, came running, helped her. Then in the morgue, they told her that Michael's heart was like a rag and was running like an 80-year-old man's. Why? Why? Because Michael had never complained about his heart, never drank, never smoked, never got nervous over nothing. To which the pathologist reasonably pointed out, he never complained. That doesn't mean it didn't bother him. Yeah, Michael was like that. He didn't like to listen to his ailments. He gets sick, takes a pill, and goes about his business. He was on fire with his work, so he burned out before his time. Heart attack, and death. It wasn't his back that hurt that night. It was his heart screaming. But they didn't hear it. Anna just didn't think it could happen. City friends came to bury Michael. All the village came, other farmers came, district leaders, even was all respected Michael, sincerely worried about his departure. That was especially hard for Michael's parents. They could not believe that he was gone. After the funeral, Anna's parents began to insist that she return to the city, but she refused. She would not give up Michael's case, of course. She doesn't know much about it, but she would look into it. And for that, her husband's parents were grateful. Farming was more than a business to Michael. It was his baby, and it was sad to wind it down. Maybe Anna will be able to keep and increase a good name. Michael will continue to be remembered. And so it's been 40 days. While the farm was in the field, James, the farm manager, was in charge. He had a lot of experience in farming. He'd grown up in the area. She could count on him. And yet the woman was only now beginning to realize what a heavy burden she had taken on. Anna stared into the night sky. The thoughts in her head were one sadder than the other, and the one above didn't come off. A bright star. Interesting, but this time it flew for a particularly long time. Or so I thought. At least she managed to whisper the cherished words. What women and herself did not immediately realize, and then even collapsed herself. Why should she do all this now that Michael know? Now she's alone and all her life will be like this. No one and no one else is needed. The widow never again on this most painful topic to even think. But her heart couldn't be stopped. Yes, Anna whispered that night. I want a child. The star went out. Anna shivered in the cold. What are the temperature swings in August? Hot by day, cold by night. All right. The main thing is that there will be no frost. It's still early. She sighed again, got up and went into the house. She had to go to bed. Tomorrow she had to go to the library and then to the field. James, though he is good, but she has to get into things herself. Tomorrow the men go to work. Everything is ripe. And there, look, and the wheat with the minimum will come up. A lot of worries, and maybe it's good. There is almost no time for sadness, and heavy thoughts recede. But falling asleep, she still sobbed in 3 streams, remembering her husband. How much she loved him, and still does. All night they dreamed as if she was rocking the baby. She could even smell the sweet smell of his head. The baby looked at Anna and smiled. She woke up with a smile on her lips. She remembered the dream and wondered who was the boy or the girl. She never realized. But the feeling of maternal happiness still did not pass. As if I really held my own baby in my arms. But who was it? Anna did not know, but only remembered the eyes of the child. Surprisingly reminiscent of her husband's eyes. The memory of Michael immediately wiped the smile from her lips. Yes, it was a good dream, but now it was definitely not redundant anymore. Anna sighed heavily. She got out of bed and settled into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. What's the point of making it? A cup of coffee and a cheese sandwich. For her alone, that's all she needed. In the kitchen, she grabbed the first mug she could find. Her hand froze. It's the car's favorite. And this is the little spoon he always used to hang sugar with. There's still a little old spoon on it. Inherited from Anna's grandmother, it's old, but so memorable. While the kettle is boiling, the woman sat down on her husband's former place by the window, pressed this very spoon to her lips and thought. Maybe her parents were right to insist she return to the city. Everything here reminded her of Michael, and that made it so painful and hurtful to realize that she would never see him again, never hear his voice. The kettle had long since gone off, and for all she sat staring at one point, I'm not going anywhere. Finally, she said loudly, as if someone else could hear her, and reached for the kettle. Yes, life goes on, and that life is connected with the village. After drinking her coffee, she quickly got ready and ran to the library. Cindy was waiting for her at the closed door. To her, she was going to hand over the files. To be honest, Anna was a little shocked in front of this elderly woman. Cindy had worked in the village school all her life. For many years, she had been the headmaster, a bossy, soft-spoken woman. But at the same time, if she spoke, it was always to the point. Cindy was respected by everyone and her opinion was listened to. For 3 years, as she took a well-deserved vacation, she did not think to work. And then Anna decided to leave the library. It was difficult to find a new responsible worker in the village, but no one wanted to dissuade Anna. Everyone realized that if the farming business folded up, everyone in the village would have a hard time. We had already gone through this stage, and so the chairman of the village council went to Cindy with a request to take over the duties of the librarian at least for a year. Cindy thought for a while and agreed. Indeed, who else but her? You can't leave the people in the village without spiritual food you delay. Anna, she said, and they instead of greeting. Oh, I'm sorry, Anna replied, out of breath. I didn't calculate a little time, I overslept a little. If this is how you will manage our household, it's not good. For sleep the field does not like. I will take into account, peacefully answered Anna. She wanted to answer Cindy something harshly. What's wrong with an ex-principal? Well, he's got a lot of socializing to do. There was a lot of work to do in the library. While we checked all the books against the catalog, while we waited for the commission from the district, while we formalized all the necessary paperwork. In short, we got out of that old library. Anna was Cindy. When the sun was already rolling down, lighting up the red sunset, the livestock had already returned from the fields of trouble. Left mistresses hurried to the barns. Nodding scoundrels, somewhere laughter could be heard walking youth. Soon it would descend again that night. I didn't have time. I'm in the field today, Anna remarked sadly. I hope James himself will quite right himself. That one will do fine, replied Cindy. Sergei can be relied on. He's a good agronomist and a good manager, but he still needs an assistant. He doesn't know how to work with documents, and he hasn't learned how to talk to his bosses. He'll manage. Cindy looked questioningly at her companion. They were walking along the evening street. The August chill was once again covering the village. How could it be otherwise? Cindy, I can't let Michael down. Quietly, she answered. That's right, nodded the former principal, now librarian. Then Cindy looked at Anna carefully and added in a softer tone, Honey, why don't we have some tea? Yes, that's a good idea. Anna nodded in confusion. Let's go to my place. I really don't have anything prepared. We'll think of something. What's to think of? There is boiling water. That's good, Cindy answered cheerfully and smiled slightly. Anna looked at her companion with different eyes. Now she did not seem strict, even stiff. During this day at work, they had even become friends a little. No, Cindy is not an iron woman, as she was called by many ordinary women in the village. She smiled kindly, almost like a mother. They went into the house. Anna was fussing in the kitchen. Cindy, in the meantime, walked through the rooms. Nice house Michael fixed, noted the guest, going into the kitchen. Everything is so thorough, solid. Well done. And you, and a great hostess. It's cozy. Who needs this coziness now? Barely holding back tears, Anna replied. I do not want to be in the house. Everything reminds me of Michael. Tomorrow I'll go to the office at dawn and then to the field. It's good that you are so eager to take on a new job. But you can't tear your heart out. Cindy sat down at the table and looked at her hostess carefully. I know it's hard. Everything reminds you of your husband now. But how do you want it to be? Anna looked at the guest in surprise, and she continued. First of all, take away all his things. Hide it away. Secondly, why is Michael's picture still in the living room? But that's how it's supposed to stay for 40 days. While the soul, they say, says goodbye to home. It's been longer than that. Take the picture down. Easy for you to say, Cindy. Anna exclaimed. How can I? It's like betraying him. These things are pictures. The only thing that warms the soul. Nonsense, you say? Cindy frowned. Then grinned sadly. That's easy for me to say. Do you know what I had? And then over a cup of tea, the former principal told her story. When I was young, when I was still in the institute, when I studied in the city, I got married for the first time. She loved her husband to the point of madness. She was expecting a child from him and was about to take a sabbatical leave. For this reason, when disaster struck, her husband was hit by a car. He died afterward in the hospital. And Cindy had a late-term miscarriage. And after that, the doctors said she was definitely not going to have any more children. The young woman was devastated. The light faded before the eyes of her beloved No, and the meaning of their life was lost forever. Then her mother came and took Cindy to the village. Here she recovered a little, then graduated from the institute by correspondence, went to work in a school. And then one day in the district center at a teachers' meeting she met Peter. He taught math in another village. Young, interesting man, colleagues whispered widower. His wife died in childbirth, so he raises his son alone. The boy is only 3 years old. Cindy, when she heard about it, she felt sorry for Peter and the baby. She remembered her own story. After the meeting, they accidentally ran into Peter at the local cookery shop, where Cindy had run in for a cup of tea. They smiled politely at each other. Peter offered to sit next to them at a table. They talked about professional topics and ate beliashi. That was the end of their first communication. Then they met a few more times for work. and then Peter came to visit Cindy for the November holidays. They had a nice time. Cindy's mom liked Peter very much, and Cindy herself realized that she was attracted to Peter. Anyway, the four of them spent Christmas with Cindy, Peter, his son Kevin, and his mother. They got married in the spring, and they've been together ever since. Cindy and Peter are soulmates. Kevin from the first days of Cindy mother and calls Cindy became, and he became for her the only and favorite son. It's been many years now, and all is well with them. Guests in town for a long time, a big boss to his parents on holidays. With the whole family comes his wife. He and two daughters, Cindy adores granddaughters, and the arrival of his son is waiting impatiently. You marveled, Anna. I didn't know you didn't have a son. No one ever said anything to me about it in the village. He's my own. Even though I didn't give birth to him, Cindy smiled. They say people because it's forgotten, I guess. I've become a real mom to him. Kostya knows everything, but it doesn't matter to him. That's the way it is. Why did I tell you all this? Anna, you must understand that life doesn't end with the loss of love. And as she was leaving, Cindy repeated Anna's phrase, life doesn't end. Remember that. As Anna fell asleep, she remembered the words of the wise principal. And in the morning, waking up, she was going to her new job. James was already in the office. When Anna appeared on the doorstep with the first day of work, Anna smiled. Old agronomist in the field with me, will you go? Or will you stay here? Anna nodded. I want to study the documents. And James agreed correctly. I can handle the men myself. The paperwork's harder for me. You can ask Wendy if you need anything. Wendy is an experienced accountant who has worked in the office for many years. Indeed, during the day she helped Anna to understand many questions, but it was still clear. It would not be easy not from the librarian and farm manager to retrain. But the young woman suddenly as a spirit perked up and realized that she will succeed. After all, around good people who will help if anything. Yes, Michael picked the right people. Anna returned home in the evening, tired from the documents, even a little headache, but it did not shake the new manager's confidence in her abilities. She decided to have a little rest and to sit with the papers at home, as Michael used to do. He had never bought that combine. Now he would not have time to get it at a reduced price. But the winter season is ahead. We have to think how to keep the cattle safe and sound. She was thinking about work when she crossed the threshold of the house. And then the sadness came over her again. She was alone again, and Michael's eyes from the picture in the living room were so penetrating that it made her want to howl. Anna remembered Cindy Nikolaevna's advice that she should put away all Michael's things, and the woman decided to follow that advice. No more grieving. Life goes on. Putting aside the documents she had brought with her, Anna brought 2 large cardboard boxes from the pantry and began to put away everything that reminded her of Michael. She put the souvenirs and her favorite mug and spoon. Last, she took the portrait with the black ribbon, a farewell letter. She whispered and kissed the picture of her husband and put it in the box. Anna decided to take everything she had collected to the very shed that Michael had converted into an office. It was dry there. No snow in the winter, nothing should go to waste. Anna took the key and turned on the shed and the lights. It was her first time in this barn. After Michael had remodeled the place, that's the kind of obsession her husband had. He thought of this place as his territory. Anna even mentally apologized to the deceased for trespassing. And then, putting aside all doubts and superstitions, mistressly looked around the room of the box. She decided to place it on an old cabinet that lurked in the corner of this small office. By the way, from the inside, the shed really resembled a workroom. The walls husband paneling gypsum, cardboard, and painted in a neutral color on slabbed floors, put cheap carpeting. The furniture is old, but quite suitable for the working area. Michael knew how to organize space. Anna was surprised that Michael had organized everything so well. She, too, was always at work, library, or household chores. Why had Michael never once bragged to her that there was a decent office inside the barn? Why had she never been allowed in here, having identified the boxes on the cupboard? Anna sat pensively in the chair, looked at the desk, smiled sadly. There they were, gardening textbooks lay the table a stack, and next to them thick notebooks. She picked up one of them, adorable. Turns out Michael had been outlining reading. There were also notebooks with some lectures. Apparently, former agronomy students took them, probably from James too. Anna put the notebook on the table, moved its edge, and immediately heard something fall from the table. She bent over to see it was a small, neat-looking key from the desk, driven by curiosity. Anna picked up the key and got a better look at the desk. There were no closing compartments at first glance, but as she opened the largest door, she saw a small compartment that was locked. And that very key came up. The lock inside clicked. Anna froze. Had her husband hidden something there that she could not know? For all the documents, money, and so on. There was a normal safe in the house. Probably nothing. Something to do with gardening, nothing more. So Anna decided, pulling out a small drawer. In it lay a general notebook rolled up. The woman carefully picked it up. There were no inscriptions on the cover. She opened the notebook. From the first lines, she realized that in front of her was her husband's innermost secret, which she had not even guessed for 10 years. Anna had never imagined that her Michael, her beloved husband, could be hiding something from her. That's what the tape said. She froze in suspense and read page after page as if swallowing the information. It was Michael's personal diary. It's considered shameful and ridiculous for a man to keep a diary. I used to think so too, but then I realized that only by putting my thoughts on paper I could at least talk to someone, at least to myself, because I could not share it even with the closest person to me, my wife. And so Michael's diary began. Anna read her husband's diary and realized that her husband had another life, another woman, with Jenna as the name of that other woman. Michael had known her since childhood. They studied in parallel classes. In the 9th grade, the first romantic relationship between them began. And after the graduation party, they had their first time. Michael loved Jenna very much. He almost idolized her. He even wanted to follow her to law school, but he didn't get enough points. Good thing there was a shortage of technical schools that year. So Michael became a student after all. But they saw Jenna less and less often, and this made Michael very sad. But she was quite calm. And then Michael saw her behind someone else. He drove an expensive car up to her driveway and got out with a gorgeous bouquet of roses. Jenna hung around his neck. At that time, Michael, a mere student, could not please his beloved so much. Is a car and flowers the most important thing? He then walked up to them and just looked Jenna in the eyes. "What did you want?" The girl laughed. "You're just a friend. And William I love for real." The friend swallowed his resentment and asked Michael, "How was everything between us?" "Just an experience." Jenna shrugged and jumped into the car with William. "Boy, have you figured it out?" Condescendingly asked his new suitor, Jeremiah. "I don't advise you to go to her again." And he too got into the car, and they drove off. And Michael stood there. Yes, he wanted to scream, to run, to throw a brick at the car as it drove away. But he held back that night. He got drunk for the first time. So drunk he couldn't remember himself. The next night, he had a conversation with his father in the kitchen. The father persuaded that Michael would have a carload and a small cart of such duties. The son didn't agree. After all, he loved for real, and the father only sighed and shook his head. Time passed. No longer Michael did not seek meetings with Jenna, and she did not seek meetings. Soon he learned that his ex had married the rich man William. It hurt and hurt the guy, and he decided that he would never let any girl into his heart again. Yes, there were romances, but they were non-committal. He also chose girls simpler. After the institute, Michael tried to do business a little. It worked. On the personal front, everything was the same. Then he met Anna honestly. At first, Michael decided that she is one of many a little play in love, and he will leave her at first sight. Anna didn't hook Michael in any way, just a gray mouse, a graduate of the Art Institute, future librarian. But then there was some kind of breakdown. Yeah, Anna wasn't beautiful like Jenna. But Michael realized that not a minute went by that he didn't think about her. Her beauty wasn't external. It was as if they came from within. Her eyes. Michael was simply drawn to that blue pool. And yet it wasn't love. That's what he thought true love was in his life. Then one day he met Jenna. She and her husband came into his auto parts store. The husband, of course, didn't recognize him. But Jenna, pretended not to recognize him. And only when her husband was distracted looking at the label of an expensive motor oil, she quietly asked him if you were living alone and smiled condescendingly. "I'm getting married soon." Immediately answered Michael. "Why did you say that?" "Out of spite, I guess." "No, he wasn't going to marry me." Jenna shrugged her shoulders when she heard the answer. That made Michael angry. She didn't care. Neither did he care. But that same night he proposed to Anna. God, how happy was that girl? Michael wrote in his diary, "I thought she just looked at me like I was God, and I was. I was a little ashamed. I swore my love to her and my chest was empty. I loved another then and then loved another when I came out of the registry office with her. And then when she cuddled me at night." Everything changed when the first problems appeared in Michael's business. Anna was so sincerely worried about her husband, tried to calm him down, encourage him. That's when he drew the first parallel. And how would Jenna behave in this situation? Of course, she would have run away without thinking. Anna was there for her. She was not afraid of poverty or problems. She readily supported her husband when he expressed his thoughts about moving to the country. Anna was ready to follow him to the end of the world. It was only in the village that Michael realized that he really loved Anna. It was only then that he realized how beautiful she was. And it wasn't just her bottomless eyes that charmed her soft skin, thick russet hair, slim waist. Or maybe she had only gotten more beautiful over the years. Anna was also a wonderful hostess. She cooked deliciously. The house was always so cozy. And she never complained about the lack of money or the hardships of life in the village. At night, Michael embraced his wife with special tenderness, and during the day he worked and worked. And now they do not know the need for anything. The house, carting, everything is in it. Michael, an honorable man. Yes, he wanted children too. Very much. If Anna's problems had been discovered at the beginning of their life together, he would have left her without a second thought. But now he couldn't, because without Betty there was no point to his existence. Then 2 years ago, he suddenly met Jenna. Michael had just gone into town to pick up another shipment of parts when he suddenly saw her walking down the sidewalk. Yes, he recognized her immediately, though she didn't have her usual glossy, tired look. Michael drove behind her, slowed down. Why did he do that? He didn't understand. Perhaps he wanted his former lover to see his expensive car, and he himself looked quite presentable. So she'd see him and bite her elbows. Jenna recognized him and really changed her face. "Hi," she said, confused. "Hi," he smiled for a ride. Jenna agreed. And then, sitting in the interior of the car, they had a conversation. Jenna told him that her husband had left her without money. She didn't graduate from college. Now she works as a cashier in a supermarket. "How are you doing?" shyly asked Jenna. "I'm doing fine," Michael smiled. "I'm what they used to call a fist." "Married?" "Yeah, sure. But no kids yet," Michael answered briefly. Jenna was silent and then cried. Michael was confused, stopped the car, began to calm her down, and then everything was a blur. A cheap hotel room. A hug. When Michael realized what he had done, he immediately got ready to leave. "The room is paid for 24 hours and I'm getting dressed," he said to Jenna. "You can stay, and you're holding out?" She asked. Now she looked content and happy, and almost as beautiful as before. But Michael couldn't look at her. He was ashamed in front of his wife. Betty was the one he really loved. This was all just a misunderstanding. "I have to go home." Without looking in her direction, Michael answered. "We'll see each other again." "No, forget the whole thing. How can you not do this to me? You've always loved only me, haven't you?" Jenna shrieked. "That was a long time ago. What happened today? A mistake. I only love my wife. I'm sorry." Saying this, Michael left the room, leaving a crying Jenna behind. Was it her? Pity. A little ashamed of his behavior. But on the other hand, now they were even. He tried to forget about the story. But after a while, Jenna called him, found his numbers through mutual friends. "Hi," she told him, "I'm pregnant." "Congratulations," he said. "What does that have to do with me? It's your baby." Of course, Michael didn't believe it and asked Jenna not to call him anymore. But she did not calm down and sent him a text message the next day that she would tell his wife about everything. And that's when he called. "Don't you dare call my wife," he yelled into the phone. "I don't know if we're canceled, pregnant, or not. What we had between us was a mistake. And I told you about it. Jenya, you child, even if it is mine," then already dropping the conversation. He regretted his words a little. After all, he and Anna did not have children, and there was no chance either. But what should he do? Recognize Jenna's child. But then they would find out everything. He couldn't hurt her that badly. That same night, he discreetly took his wife's cell phone and drowned it in the lake. Let her think she'd lost it, and the next day he bought her new ones with a new asylum card. So he hoped that Jenna wouldn't be able to get to Anna. It paid off. No one bothered Anna. Jenna did not call him until 9 months later to inform him that she had had the baby after all. "I wasn't allowed to abort," she explained and laughed into the phone. "I still want a family and children in the future. Let that puppy of yours suffer. I mean, let him suffer." I couldn't believe my ears. "Michael, what did you do with the baby?" "Put it in a home," just answered Jenna. "Was he skinny?" "No, if it was healthy, I would have kept it. You'd still be recognized as the father in court, and you'd be paying good child support. But you know, it's not fun to throw your life away with a sick kid. So adios." "What orphanage did you leave him in, gritting your teeth?" Michael asked. Jenna didn't answer him anything, just laughed back and hung up. Michael stayed up all night. He thought about what he should do at that time. He equipped this office in the barn, began to study gardening, and thought how to be. Here he could quietly talk about everything to himself, to at least talk it out. And he began to write this diary. He described the past, thought about the future. He couldn't share it with anyone else. "I was afraid of hurting Anna. It's better not to talk to men in the village. Men are sometimes worse. The most talkative women." In the end, Michael still decided to search for the child left behind by Jenna. Yes, it was difficult, but small bribes at the city maternity hospital and the guardianship department helped. He found out where the boy was. He was already 6 months old at the time, and no one was in a hurry to adopt him. The whole thing was that the child had big heart problems. At 6 months old, he had already undergone one surgery. Another one was required, but it was already paid and the money was exorbitant. Even if Michael had sold all his property, it would have been unlikely that he would have remedied the situation. Meanwhile, he had genetic tests, found out the son was his. But what about before he didn't confess to Anna about the affair? And now he's shocked her with a seriously ill son. Michael decided to keep it quiet. He simply began to regularly transfer money for the treatment of his son in the very orphanage, and at the same time looked for ways to find money for the operation. Yes, things have gotten tough financially, and the household has to stay afloat. And they must not guess that there is another expense item. So Michael worked and worked hard. But he made it through. Only one day his heart couldn't take it. Michael's diary ended with these words, something bad. "My heart was so stamped today. I can't imagine that my Jack could have the same pain. I'm a grown man, and he's just a baby. But it's okay. I think I found a foundation that's going to help my boy. And then I'll find a way to convince Anna to take him in. Yeah, my wife won't know it's my son. Maybe I'll admit it to her someday, but not now." That was the end of the diary. Anna reread the last sentence several times. Tears ran down her cheeks from behind Jenna's page. And yet he loved her, only her and that poor boy. God, how hard was it for Michael? Why didn't he confess everything to her? Maybe together they could have figured out how to help the baby faster. Yes, it was a lover's baby, but it was also his son. Turns out, how much did Michael love her Anna? He kept quiet, kept silent, and agonized over his infidelity, and undermined his heart. And now he's gone. But somewhere there is a little boy with a bad heart too. Anna cried and realized more and more that she was not jealous of her husband for Jenna. It was a mistake. An obsession, a hello from the past. For that matter, Michael, Anna whispered. How could I? Why did you pity me? I'm strong. I could handle your betrayal, but you couldn't live with it. But I promise you I won't abandon our boy. Yes. For Anna, somehow this unknown baby had already become her own. Even though he was born to someone else, he's the child of her lover, and she will definitely save the baby. At night, she dreamed again that she was rocking the baby. And now she knew it was a boy, and his name was Jack. She could even see his face. Yes, the baby looked remarkably like Michael. In the morning, Anna woke up still early in the morning. She washed her face, dressed quickly, and got ready to go to town. As she was driving her car out on the deserted street, she was met by James in his SUV. Where are you going? The manager of the office on the other side of the street was surprised. To town, James, to town. You can do it without me. She answered and drove away, leaving the faithful assistant in complete bewilderment. It's no use having a mistress like that. James sighed and went to the machine yard, where the mechanics were already gathering to go to the field. She was already in town by lunchtime. From her husband's diary, the woman knew which orphanage Jack was in. That's where she headed. The guard at the orphanage explained how to get to the manager, Camille. You're Michael's wife, the principal asked incredulously. An older woman, when she introduced herself. Why didn't he come himself? I am his widow. Anna said quietly. Oh my God. Camille splashed her hands. What's the trouble? What happened? Anna explained this. Apparently it's hereditary with Jack. Camille caught it. I don't know if we should talk about everything. I know that my late husband's son is in that orphanage. I'm not the boy's mother, but I'd like to help him. Can you tell me what needs to be done? Camille lowered her eyebrows and looked intently at Anna. So you want to pay for a second operation? I know Michael was going to do it, but the amount is enormous. Did you find the money? Not yet. I don't know all the details. My husband hasn't told me anything, but I want to finish what I started. The boy is innocent and shouldn't suffer. Yes, you're right. I'll tell you everything I know. Michael found a foundation, but they can only give a portion of the money for the boy's treatment. Camille gave the details and the coordinates of the foundation, and then suddenly asked, would you like to see the child? Anna confessed very much. Only if it is not allowed at all. But I think, as an exception, you can. And soon he was standing by Jack's crib. The baby was asleep. The woman's chest ached. Yes, the baby was like something out of her dreams. Only now it wasn't ephemeral, made up, but real. The baby turned and opened his eyes for a hum and again a ringing in her chest. At Anna, she saw Michael's eyes to the baby approached the nanny, busy with the baby. Anna headed for the exit. I will definitely find a way to help Jack. Anna said goodbye. Camille stood looking after her for a long time. Did she think she was a saint or blessed? Her husband, it turns out, cheated on her, and she forgave everything, and was ready to save the child to her lover. I guess she loved her husband so much. After the shelter, Anna stopped by her parents' house. She didn't hide anything and told them about Jack and the foundation. She also shared her thoughts that during the period of everything she will have to sell the farm. And most importantly, after everything, she wants to adopt a boy. You're an idiot. Mom's up. It's not your child. You decided to sacrifice everything. What are you going to live on? A librarian's salary. You've already lost your place in the village, but you haven't found one in the city yet. Weren't you the one who urged me to go to the city after Michael died? That reminds me. Anna did, but not with someone else's child. This is Michael's baby. A child born out of adultery and cheating on you. Mom, I know he's repented of everything, and you know my problems. And this child is from your lover, who will not help you in any way. And how will you be alone with a child without a penny of money, after the sale of the farm is not quite without a penny? I'll manage somehow. She'll manage. The mother got even more angry and called the father out of the room. Father, at least you tell me. The daughter says everything right. The father called back. And a few seconds later he appeared in the kitchen. I liked Mike, but he's a pain in the ass, you know. It's his Jenna that you don't get jealous of. They despise them. Anyway, daughter, do what you think is right. Your mother and I will support you. My mom gasped at that answer and shut up. Everything was decided for her, and then she shrugged her shoulders. And maybe everything is right? Yes, the decision to adopt Jack came unexpectedly. She was surprised herself. After all, until recently, she thought that she could not love a child who was not born to her. But seeing Jack in the orphanage so small and defenseless, her heart trembled. No matter who gave birth to him. And his mother will be given to him in care and love. From her parents, Anna went to Michael's parents. Those were very surprised to see the former daughter-in-law on the doorstep. And then fussed in the room, spent. They started to set the table. No need for anything. Anna stopped them. I have a serious conversation with you. You knew Michael had a child. How? Dumbfounded, mother-in-law? I've never heard of it. And she told me about Jenna. Michael's parents listened. Then they admitted that their son had an affair before marriage, but they preferred to keep quiet about it because the breakup was very painful for him. For Michael. So this Jenna girl is back in his life. His father-in-law had collapsed. What a cuckoo, wiping her tears, added the mother-in-law. And you, daughter, you're a good girl for doing this. And thank you for telling me about your grandson. We now have a sense to live on. We'll save the boy together. You bet we will. That day, Anna stayed overnight at her late husband's parents' house. And in the morning, we went to the hospital to learn all about Jack's disease from the doctors. The doctor told us that the baby needed a new operation. We had 3 months tops. That's not what the doctor said. That's before he's actively crawling and walking. After that, the strain on the heart will increase, and things could be very bad. But is it impossible to perform such an operation within the quota? Anna asked, although she knew the answer approximately. Yes, that's what the doctor said. There are quotas, but they are in the general queue, it just will not wait. Who are you? A relative of the patron's boy. The doctor clarified. You understand, I have no right to divulge information to a stranger. Not yet, but I hope it's temporary. How so? The doctor frowned. I want to adopt Jack, but you realize it will be a problem child. Maybe this expensive surgery won't be the last. I understand. From the hospital, Anna went to the very foundation she had hoped for. But there the woman was told that the sum was too large, and the queue ahead is huge, and all children need urgent help. So she was at a complete loss. Anna returned to Mariana. It was already evening when she drove up to James' house. He had just arrived from the field. When he saw the new mistress, he frowned. Anna looked a little too tortured. James, I guess I'll have to sell the farm, she said with a sigh. Then she told the manager the story of Jack. James listened, shook his head at the difficult situation. No, of course you can sell everything, and the farm with all its assets is worth a lot more. But you can't do anything yet. It takes 6 months for you to come into the inheritance rights. Yes, that's right. It's just slipped my mind. I don't know what to do. The woman's completely confused. He's Michael's son. How can I leave him? He's so little. James wondered. If there was time, he could wait until late fall and then sell the crops to resellers for more money. But almost all of it. What do we save for seeds? And how to feed the cattle in the winter? Let the whole dairy herd go under the knife. But how can you do that? And them. And this is definitely Michael's child. Careful. Asked him. That's right. I found a genetic lab certificate in his files. Oh, and he didn't say a word. Yes, he surprised me too. Anna replied and took a sip. What are you doing? James fatherly embraced Anna and stroked her shoulder. Don't cry. It hurts from all this, Anna admitted. I'm kind of spinning. Recognizing worrying. It's basically a child born as a result of my husband's infidelity. No, I'm not jealous. I'm just hurt. It's okay. It's okay. Your soul will rest in peace. You're doing the right thing by rushing to help the baby's birth mother. She must have been an asshole. She refused in the hospital. God will judge her. Don't you worry so much, girl. We'll work something out together. Maybe we can save the farm. James was right. Soon all the farmers in the area knew that the late Michael had a sick son. The men themselves organized a collection, involved their acquaintances, and those slowly, but the money began to collect. Anna, who was torn all the time by trips to the city hospital, was tired beyond belief. She was grateful to the people helping the boy. But it was only a drop in the ocean. Michael's parents were not left out either. They even took a loan to help their grandson. But the money was still not enough. And then one day Anna's mother came to the village. Betty was initially skeptical, but seeing that her daughter could not be stopped, she had to get involved. She arrived at the end of September. Anna had just gotten back. Laughing only where they finished drying barley tired. She just poured herself some tea. There was a knock at the door. "Mom." Anna was surprised and immediately turned pale. "Has something happened to Daddy?" "No, Daddy's fine." Mom shook her head. "I want to help you. I'm sorry I didn't accept the situation in the first place. You know, I'm a difficult person. I wouldn't forgive betrayal anyway. You're different. I see you're struggling with this little guy. Camille called me, said they saw a boy. He looked like Michael. It's true, the kid had nothing to do with it." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Anna answered a little irritated. She was tired from a hard day's work, from the calls from the clinic. And then her mother arrived. I guess she decided to blow her brains out once again. That's what Betty replied and opened a small bag. From it, her mother took out an old jewelry box. Anna had never seen it before. Betty put it on a chair and opened it. When Anna looked into it, her eyes widened. The box contained antique jewelry, rings, bracelets, earrings. It's gold. She could only ask her mother gold. Betty smiled sadly. Earrings with real emeralds. "Mother, but where did you get such splendor? We've always lived modestly. You're just a teacher. Dad's a factory worker all his life. And my grandparents were simple laborers, as far as I can remember." "Yes, we're from a simple family." Betty nodded. "But your great-grandmother Adriana worked at a rich merchant's house when she was young. Then the merchant fled abroad to England, I think. And Adriana helped her pack before she left. And when everything was loaded into a wagon to the house, men with pitchforks and axes came. The merchant and his family barely managed to jump into the wagon, but I guess he overdid it. The horse, from pain and fright, rushed as hard as it could. Some things flew out of the wagon, and the merchant woman couldn't hold a small bundle in her hands. It fell right under your great-grandmother's feet. The merchant wanted to return it, but the angry men were running after them. So they left. Adriana pushed the little bundle under a bush. When the men went into the house to do their chores, I managed to pull it out and carried it home. And there she realized what she was holding so tightly in her hands. It was her jewelry. Adriana didn't say anything to anyone at the time. At first, she was afraid they'd blame her. She thought she was serving the merchants, so she was in league with them. But then she decided to let the jewelry lie there, waiting for its owners. She really wanted them back. But the years passed. Adriana married a good man, a real communist. One day she confessed to him that she had some real treasures. Timothy swore that she didn't give everything to the new authorities at once. And now how to explain where it all came from? He argued, and then buried this box in iron barrels in the garden under the apple trees. Out of harm's way, it stayed there for years. And then the war. My husband went to the front. Life was hard in the city. Adriana and her daughter were starving. One day she dared to use the warehouse, dug out a jewelry box. She chose simpler jewelry at the market, then exchanged it for food. A week later, she received a funeral for Tim. "Oh," Adriana cried. She blamed herself. She thought it was because she had taken someone else's jewelry, and they had taken it from her again. And she buried the box. Never got her hands on it again. Then Adriana and her daughter were given an apartment in a well-equipped house. And on the old plot, they arranged a summer house. And only shortly before her death, she told her daughter about the treasure buried under the apple trees. But she strictly ordered to keep silent and never use this wealth, because it was someone else's. Betty's mother remembered her mother's words all her life. She told her daughter about the box only before her death, and again ordered her not to touch the jewelry, in case the owners showed up, and not to tell anyone, so that no harm would come to her. Betty had a superstitious fear of that jewelry box. At the cottage, she often went to the place where the apple tree used to grow. I did. I wondered what untold treasures were in there. I didn't tell my husband for a long time, so that he wouldn't want to use the warehouse. I wondered if it was really cursed. Then she confessed to her husband. He laughed for a long time, considering it a fantasy. But one day he went to the dacha and dug out a striking barrel, and in it the very box. Betty scolded her husband severely for his willfulness, and then made him bury it back. When Anna told about the boy's son Michael, Betty, of course, immediately thought of that very jewelry, but then she was tempted to use them. But recently she had a strange dream, as if she were walking through a field. Around daisies blooming, dragonflies flying. The sun is shining so brightly, beauty in a word. Suddenly, there is a noise above her head, a scream. Anna looks up into the sky, and there is a white bird flying and something in its claws is clutched. A kite is circling nearby, screaming and shouting. And then the white bird flew down with a stone. It flew to Tatiana and hit her with its wing and gave birth to its claws. A box fell at the woman's feet. "Save me," she heard your voice, as if a bird had shouted it. She woke up with Betty and couldn't understand. What was the dream about? She told her husband Nick. He just snorted and said he should watch less sci-fi movies. And then they looked at each other. He went pale, realizing what the dream meant. Maybe it's time. Betty asked hesitantly. Who knows? Maybe it is. Nick shrugged his shoulders. Well, what if the jewelry is cursed and it won't do any good? Betty, you know how Anna feels, don't you? Yeah, it's a shame about the kid. What if it helps? And I think your grandmother made up more about the curse. And the fact that grandfather died, it's not the jewelry's fault. Do you know how many people died back then? Betty agreed with her husband. So they went to the cottage and dug up the jewelry box. Then she went to her daughter's house. And now, sitting at the table in the spacious kitchen together with her daughter, they were deciding how to proceed. And frankly, surprised you surprised me, Mom shook her head Ioapa. About the curse, of course, I do not believe. And these jewels can really help save Jack. But how to use them? You'd have to sell them, wouldn't you? That's what I'm thinking, my daughter. We need to find someone reliable. Do you have such a person in mind? Anna just shrugged her shoulders. There didn't seem to be anyone. Perhaps only James is Michael's faithful assistant and friend. He must not fail. The next morning, having seen her mother off at the bus stop, Anna went to James's office. He was having a loud discussion with the accountant in his office. Greetings, Anna, he nodded when he saw the owner. Here we are deciding with Valentina how much grain to give to the people on it. Then they shook their heads slightly. Anna, at least 2 are needed. But Anna, then for sale, how much less will be? Wendy exclaimed. And we still have taxes to pay. The loans are hanging without Michael. The case with a squeak still went on. Enough for everything. Anna answered uncertainly and looked questioningly at James. We should talk. Let's go to my office. The manager obediently followed her, and there was Anna in the study, and told him her family secret, asked him to help sell the treasure. There should be enough to pay for Jack's treatment, and we can pay off all our debts. She said at the end of her story, and again she looked questioningly at the manager. You can help James. We need to find the right person. I understand you can just hand it over as a treasure and get your 25%. But how long would that take? Jack, I need an operation right away. James promised to help, and just a couple days later he told me that there is such a person. Together, they went to the city to a jeweler, Yilong Hai Tong, looking at the contents of the box, and then promised his assistance. And in 2 more days she received a very decent sum. It should have been enough for the operation and the running costs of the household. Did he sell the jewelry to someone from the jeweler? Anna wasn't interested. It was none of her business. The jeweler only said that a very rich man bought them. Let him use it for his own good. Not Jack. It had to be saved. Soon the kid underwent surgery in one of the capital's clinics. The boy quickly recovered. And by Christmas, Anna was able to take the child to her home. She was able to legally adopt the boy. The guardianship office convinced her to get a guardianship. It's more profitable that way. There will be an additional payment from the state. And when the child grows up, she will also get an apartment from the state. but he decided to be firm husband's child. This is her child, and she herself can raise him. And he will be a real son for her. Without any support from the state herself will cope. It is not for money that she takes him. 3 years passed. Anna and Jack lived in the village. During this time, Anna has mastered the position of the head of the farm and very confidently managed the business. James was still around as a faithful assistant. The farm worked in full force. People worked hard. Anna was happy. Her husband was happy for her. And Michael would also be pleased, knowing that Jack was now alive and well with her. The boy went to the village kindergarten, was a very smart, quick-witted boy. Anna could not be pleased with her son. Jack read poetry well, sang songs with pleasure at matinees and kindergarten. He was always the most active and the most artistic. Anna admired her son, rejoiced at his little victories. And Jack loved his mother very much. How many flower beds he tore in the yard, collecting bouquets for Mom. How many times he put his knees up, catching butterflies to give to Mom for flowers. Anna baby did not scold, only sighed and smiled, smeared his knees with green and blue on the wounds. And he patiently kept silent with annoyance, wrinkling his nose, because he had never caught a butterfly. And how happy my mother would be, but Anna understood her son's sadness. She explained that a butterfly is good because it flies, flutters, and when you catch it, you put it in the palm of your hand. It will die. When you see a beautiful butterfly, just call me. We will admire together, she told her son. Jack nodded understandingly. Oh, how many times Anna ran to see those butterflies. Not all, of course, were so beautiful, but she awed when she saw and Kapusniki, and even the usual moth-doe smiled, was able to please his mother. She lived for her son, thought only of him. On men did not even look, although the young deceased often drew the attention of other farmers and the district authorities. At one time, he began to show her signs of attention himself. The head of the district, Anna did not know how to refuse him, so as not to offend and not to make an enemy. If only he was young and unmarried, but he was already under 60 years old and had grandchildren. Then James helped, several times before the eyes of the head. Then Anna will take Anna by the hand, then in her ear something spikes no. She realized that her loyal manager, she played it right. But the head understood in his own way, decided that the young farmer is already busy. And since James was almost friendly, he decided to stay out of it. And then he calmed down, and James and I no longer had to play the heroic lover. No one did. Jack grew up in love and care. Michael's parents often came to see their grandson. Sometimes Anna's parents also dropped by. Yes, the kid had enough care and attention. And only sometimes the 5-year-old would ask his mom, "Where is his dad?" "Our daddy is in the sky," Anna sighed and hugged her son. The boy looked at the sky and could not understand where his daddy was hiding there and why. The others have their dads nearby. And this moment was the only thing that marred the boy's cloudless existence. "Don't be sad, baby," Anna said to him. "I'm here for you." And the son hugged her tightly around the neck. "Mommy, I love you so much," Jack whispered in Anna's ear, and she would hug him. At times like that, she was the happiest. She's a mom, and that's all that matters. Often after Jack was put to bed, Anna would sit by the window and look at the stars. She reminisced about her past life with Michael. Yes, they had been happy, and it still hurt a little that he wasn't around, and would never be again. And it would probably drive her crazy if Jack hadn't miraculously appeared in her life. Yes, on the one hand, she should have been angry at her husband, accusing him of cheating. On the other hand, was it cheating? She was grateful. Grateful to her husband for his mistake. After all, she was the one who had allowed her to become a mom, even if it was in this way. Anna was even grateful that Jenna had left the baby at the orphanage. Otherwise, she wouldn't have met again. Now he was the most native, the most beloved, the most. It happened in the middle of November. It was a day off. The first snow had fallen since the night, and it was white outside. Anna had started the dough for pies in the morning. And when Jack woke up, the house already smelled of fragrant baking. "Pies?" asked the boy, looking at his mother in the kitchen and rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Pies. Anna smiled, taking a tray out of the oven with puffy pastries. Your favorite with apples. Go to the bathroom to wash up and to the table twice. I didn't have to beg for a can. He quickly ran to the bathroom and his bare feet were already slapping back. Anna listened with a smile when the son appeared in the kitchen at his mother's house, and even his hair was deliberately frowning. Why are you barefoot on the cold floor? Who's going to cough? Not I, said Jack, climbed on a stool and already a petitioner, added Mom, and let's go outside after breakfast, there is snow. Yes, it's winter. Bending my line, and you want a sheet. Come on, Mom, the son pouted his lips. I want to make a snowman. All right, let's go make a snowman. Let's just eat some pies. Jack smiled happily and dangled his bare feet on the stool. Anna only sighed, brought her son's slippers and pulled them on his feet, then waved at the top of his head some more. They enjoyed their breakfast. Then they gathered outside. It was a fairy tale in the yard. Flakes of white snow covered everything, trees, fences, and buildings. Everything seemed to be wrapped in a solid blanket of snow. And at the same time, it was so warm and the snow on the ground was so soft. Anna and her son were making snowmen, throwing snowballs at each other. They were laughing and fooling around. They immediately, and did not notice how near their house was getting dark foreign car, and out of it came a man of about 35 years. He stood a little at the fence with a smile, looking at the fun, mother and son. Then he opened the gate. Hearing the clatter of a flask, Anna turned her head and raised her eyebrows in surprise. This was a man she did not know. Excuse me, are you Anna? The man asked uncertainly. Who are you? Anna answered cautiously. And I'm what you might call an hare. Hare? The woman was surprised. And what do you follow in my house? No, you misunderstood me, the man hesitated. I came to see you to talk about jewelry. He turned slightly pale. She was about to deny everything, as the man beat her to it. No, you don't think I have a problem with you. I just want to know everything. First, let me introduce myself. Robert. I'm the great-grandson of a merchant. Hearing the surname of the jewelry merchant whom Anna had sold a few years ago, the woman turned even paler, and the man, seeing her reaction, hurriedly explained everything. Robert was born and raised in the capital city. His parents told him a story when he was still a child, how his great-great-grandfather lived in a small town back then. He was a merchant. Then he had to flee with his whole family. The plans were to get to England, but didn't have enough finances to get across the border. The merchant was counting on his wife's jewelry, but she couldn't save it when they were fleeing from the manor. They had to hide. For several years, he lived with his family in the woods, hiding from the authorities, but then they were still found. True, by that time the great-great-grandfather was seriously ill. Soon he died. The new authorities did not persecute the widow. They even called her to work on the collective farm. Then her children worked in that very collective farm. By honest labor, the family proved that you can rely on them. Then many things happened in life. In the end, Robert's father was able to go to the capital. There he studied, got married, found a family. He himself knew little about the past of his ancestors, but only remembered either a story or the truth. Allegedly, his great-great-grandfather had jewelry. Some of them were even engraved. Ethan and Daria were the names of the merchant and his wife. What happened to the jewelry? We don't know. Robert studied history and taught at a university in the capital. One day at the retest, there was such a case one of the students could not answer the simplest ticket. Robert shook his head regretfully, saying, I'll wait for the next time. And this is already the commission. The girl was torn and suddenly reached for her earrings and put them in front of the teacher. These are rare teardrop earrings, she said. Take it, just give it a C, please. Robert looked angrily at the girl and wanted to throw a bribe. As suddenly noticed on the earring engraving and in the count, and Daria immediately in memory recalled the stories of his father, the history of his family. Robert asked the student where the earrings came from. She calmed down a little and told him that her father had given them to her, and that he had bought them for a lot of money at an auction. Robert was curious if it was the same jewelry that his great-grandmother had lost. He asked the student for his father's phone number, gave her the long-awaited C, and gave her the earrings. Don't throw away such gifts. he advised her one last time. The stunned girl joyfully galloped out of the classroom, and Robert afterwards called her father, asked about the auction. Then came out on the owner of the jewelry on the jeweler. Little by little, he gathered all the information and found out about Anna. "Do you want money?" asked Anna. "When I realized everything. To be honest, I wouldn't say no," smiled Robert. "But in general, I came to find out how you got this jewelry." And now Anna told her story. Of course, without details, the very essence. About the fact that after her husband's death, her son needed an urgent operation, and only thanks to those jewelry it was possible to do it. "Well, is it nice that this jewelry helped to save your son's life?" Robert smiled. "Now I know for sure that it wasn't all fiction. It was real. Don't worry, I won't charge you anything. You did the right thing. And the jewelry may make some people happy now. I've lived without them, and I'll continue to live without them." Anna looked at the guest already with surprise. What a noble man. She invited him into the house, where she treated him with cakes and tea. Jack was always hanging around. "What a nice baby you have," Robert remarked. "Does he look like you?" I think Anna only blushed a little and smiled. Of course Jack didn't look like her. He looked less and less like Michael as he grew older. But that didn't stop him from being the most beloved and important person in Anna's life. Robert sat for a while, thanked for the warm meeting, and said goodbye. Anna then all day wondered what a weirdo this man traveled hundreds of kilometers just to learn about the past. And very honorable. He could have demanded money from Anna. But no, he didn't. Winter has passed, spring has come ringing and bubbling. Everyone in the village fussed, buried here in yards and vegetable gardens. She disappeared until the night at work, then in the office, then in the field, then in the district center on business went. Jack went to the kindergarten in the morning, and in the evening his neighbor took him from there. Anna agreed with her. It was not difficult for Kate to do it, and she liked to take care of her little neighbor. Her children lived in the city long ago, and her grandchildren were grown up. Sometimes her granddaughter brings her great-grandson, but it happens once a year. And the old lady liked to play with children so much. So she jumped, duplicated the little neighbor. One day after kindergarten, Kate brought Jack to her house, occupied him with another coloring, and went to the vegetable garden to sow carrots. Suddenly, the old woman sees a cab stopped near Anna's house. A slender young blonde woman got out of it and walked confidently into the yard. "Who do you want?" Kate shouted to her. "The landlady is still in the field." Curled her lips, the stranger. "I see. Can I take a message?" "No need. I'll come back next time." The stranger got into a cab and sped away from the village along the dusty road. Kate didn't even have time to ask her. Who was she and why did she come at all? And when Anna came to get her son, she told her everything. The blonde? Anna was surprised. "I don't know who that could be." "Oh, well, she'll have to come back." A month passed. After the sowing season, there was a little rest for the villagers, and Anna relaxed a little. One day, she and her son decided to go to the lake for a swim. They just came to the threshold, and they met a woman walking along the path. Tall, slender, beautiful, blonde hair. She knew at once it was the blonde Kate had mentioned. But who was she? And Jenna, Jack's mother, instead of saying hello, the woman said. She didn't even glance in the direction of the boy, who stood next to Anna and stared at Anna, and she was confused at what she heard. "Jenna, is that the one? Why did you come here?" she asked quietly. "I want to take my son," Jenna answered and grinned insolently. "I gave birth to him." He heard the whole conversation, but understood little. He only looked from his mom to the beautiful aunt and back again. Anna returned to the house, promising that they would go to the lake later. Now she had to talk to her guest. Jack obediently went into the room, took out the cars, and noisily began to play racing. Anna, combined with excitement, invited Jenna to the gazebo. "Yes, I agree," nodded, and the first went down the path in the gazebo, sat down on the seat, and looked around evaluating. "Anna bade that hear you." She said, "Is it all Mike rebuilt, or have you already?" "It does not matter." Anna replied flatly, "Please explain the purpose of your visit." "I told you I want to take my son." Jenna humbled herself, but with a look. "Yes, And what did Meshkov found in you that apparently was not in Tun? Anna answered and continued further. Why did you think you had something to do with my son? I knew it. I adopted him from an orphanage. Even if you did, no court is going to give that baby back to you. You're right to point out that I adopted Jack after you gave him up in the hospital. I didn't have the money to treat him. A little squeaky-voiced Jenna. And you don't get to tell me how to live my life. I'm not. I'm just not giving up my son. Get out of here. She stood in front of Jenna, arms crossed. She was determined. She was going to take this insolent lady by the scruff of the neck and throw her out of the yard. Why do you want someone else's baby? Jenna asked with a sneer. Can't you have your own? None of your business. It's my child and my husband's. What are you talking about? Jenna laughed in her voice. I'm especially fascinated by the way you say my baby. How is it yours? It has nothing to do with Michael either. That's where you lie. Anna grinned too. Michael did the tests. I saw the test results myself. He's Jack's father. I don't think so. And Jenna, putting her foot on her leg, told Anna how it really was. At the time she slept with Michael, she was already pregnant. It was a small term, and the baby's father had moved on. And then Michael came along, a successful, confident married man. So what? Jenna was sure Michael would believe her. After all, he couldn't forget his first true love, her Jenna. Michael is an honorable man who wouldn't abandon a pregnant woman. And he took it from his mouth and started spouting something about loving his wife, about how their night with Jenna was a mistake. Maybe Jenna wouldn't give up so easily. But then the baby's real father showed up again. Not a poor man either, by the way. And maybe everything would have worked out, but he died in an accident. And Jenna was left alone with a baby under her heart, and she felt so sorry for herself. Everyone had cheated her. What did she need that baby for? To survive in this cruel world. And when the hospital told her that the baby had health problems, there was no more doubt. She decided to give up the boy. But her resentment towards Michael persisted. She told him that she had fathered a child with him and abandoned it. Why? Yes, to torment this noble citizen and perhaps even bankrupt him. Jenna knew how much the operation cost. It was a lot of money. Michael had to sell everything to cure the baby. Yes, she was sure Michael would be looking for a son. And so he did. And in that very orphanage, a friend of hers worked as a nanny. She whispered that Michael had shown up. She also told Jenna that he'd taken a DNA test. The test was easy. There was only one lab in town, and Jenna's friend worked there. Jenna talked her into tampering with the test, allegedly to get Michael back. But in reality, she didn't need him anymore, and neither did the baby. By then, she'd met a new boyfriend, a rich Italian guy twice her age. But it was nothing. Jenna watched from afar as Michael ran around with the baby, looking for money, and waited to see how it would end. And then it just didn't seem to matter. A rich Italian man asked her to marry, and Jenna flew to Milan. She was triumphant. Things were finally going to work out in her life. She could forget about money, resentment, men, and even that baby. She had a new life. Anna heard Jenna and couldn't believe it was true. So Michael was deceived too, and Jack is not his son. Of course, Jenna's words could be doubted, but they were more like the truth. Anna saw that Jack was growing up, becoming more like Michael. There was no Downs right away. It was just the same eye color that looked like him. Anna had convinced herself that Jack was a copy of Michael, and Michael's parents wanted to believe it. And the boy doesn't look like Jenna. So there really was a third person. God Jack, not Michael's son, from realizing that. Anna burst into tears. She could barely control her emotions and asked calmly, why did you need a son now? A lot of things had changed. Jenna looked at Anna defiantly with a slight squint in her eyes. It turned out that my husband Matteo wants a child, but he has problems. And as it turns out, I can't give birth anymore. We even wanted to adopt. But then I confessed that I had my own child. We thought about it and decided it would be better if he lived with us. Jenna didn't tell me her Italian husband was furious when he found out that his beloved wife had once given birth and abandoned his own child. Even wanted a divorce. So Jenna begged him to forgive her, and he agreed to do so. but on one condition: if she went and came back with the baby. There was no choice. Jenna agreed. Back home, she learned of Michael's death, that his wife had adopted the boy. Jenna was pleased that the boy had had surgery, so she wouldn't have to mess with him about with this problem. She didn't need Jack, but she couldn't lose the motel. And feelings had nothing to do with it. The motel was rich, and that was all that mattered. She stared at the insolent guest in confusion. What Jenna had said about Jack had been a shock, of course. But in any case, Jack was still her son, even if not by Michael, even if he was a stranger by blood. But at the same time, he was her nearest and dearest. She wouldn't give her baby to that painted doll. Get out of my house, or I'll call the police. Anna said confidently and pointed Jenna to the path to the gate. You shouldn't do that, Jenna shrugged. The baby is mine, and any forensics will prove it. I'll get good lawyers and I'll get Jack back. No court in the world would go for that. You abandoned a sick and defenseless child. You had your own life while he was choking on seizures. You didn't care if he lived or died. You were living in your Italy and feeling fine with you all the while I was his mother. All right then. Goodbye, mother. With a grin said Jenna and added goodbye for now. I will definitely come back for my son. And she left, with a grin on her lips. Outside the gate, the engine started and the car door slammed. The car drove away, taking the unpleasant guest with it. Anna sat in the gazebo. Her mood was completely ruined. In the bathtub, neither son Michael. This thought developed her mind. She did not notice how out of the house ran out of the bath and headed towards her. The baby approached and put his arm around Anna's shoulders. From surprise, the woman shuddered. Mom, I scared you. The little boy became alarmed. What are you, my darling? I was just thinking, smiled Anna and hugged her son tightly. Mom, where that aunt left. What did she want? Yes, so Sonny on work, one question solved. Came up with Anna. She thought about it and added, Son, if that aunt ever comes to our house or you see her on the street, don't go with her, don't talk to her. Mommy, she's bad. Very bad. You got it memorized. Don't go with her. Baby agreed, nodded in response, and immediately reminded about the lake. Sure, son, let's go swimming. We were going to. Anna came to her senses, and she, taking her son's hand firmly, headed down the path through the vegetable garden. There behind the vegetable garden sat a clean and clear lake. The locals loved to vacation here. Anna and Jack both bathed and sunbathed. Little by little, the emotions in Anna's soul settled down. And then, returning home, the woman thought, what, in fact, had changed? Yes, it was a pity that Michael turned out not to be Jack's father, although that Jenna shouldn't be believed. But even so, I love my son and I'm not giving him to anyone. Jenna has no rights to him. The only thing is how to tell Michael's parents that Jack is not their own. Anna realized that this information could hurt Michael's elderly parents. They lived only with thoughts of their favorite grandson of their blood. What's the result? No blood. Nothing left after her son. She decided not to say anything to Michael's parents. She didn't tell anyone about her meeting with Jenna. The woman hoped that this insolent person would never come into her life or her son's. And so they walked home from the lake. The sun affectionately hugged her shoulders to the warm wind. Somewhere in the bushes, tinkling grasshopper was rolling. They held their son's hand tightly. Jack chattered and chattered something childishly. The woman listened, nodding in response, while thinking of her mama. Suddenly she heard Jack's voice. That Sonny shook. She shook her head as if chasing away anxious thoughts. You're not listening to me, are you? Do you have to lip, Jack? What are you, little? I'm listening. I'm just thinking a little bit. I'm sorry. What were you saying? I was saying I love you very much and I love you. Anna crouched down in front of her son, hugging his arms tightly. Jack trustingly circled her neck. Anna's heart was joyfully nourished by her son, her most beloved and dear son. No one will take him away from her. Jenna, meanwhile, was on her way back to town. Sitting in the cab, she mentally worked out a plan how she could get Jack. As a matter of fact, she wasn't interested in Jack herself. She had only glimpsed him in the village, only noting that he looked like his own father, who had died in an accident. That's better. She thought she was raising her beloved husband's child. Jenna thought with a chuckle about Anna. She fondly remembered Anna's reaction when she found out about the fake DNA test. Trying to appear calm, nearly cried herself. Jenna was amused and delighted at this could-do rivalry. Hurt. Michael chose her then. Let him have it now. But how to get Jack back? Jenna realized that in court she would have problems. Even the strongest lawyers wouldn't take the case. She expected Anna to give up the baby when she learned the truth. But it turned out that didn't work. She's better attached to the baby. We have to figure something out. She's been thinking for a month, hatching a plan. Ever since that first trip to the village when she didn't find her home. And now the meeting has taken place. She had to do something. In Town N, Jenna had the most expensive hotel room in the country. She could afford a motel, not yet restricted in her means. Of course, she could have stayed at her mother's apartment where Jenna had grown up. But she was disgusted to think of the Khrushchevdom she had lived in before. And in fact, all her past life was different now. And to keep it all, she would fight. Jenna didn't even call her mother to inform her about her arrival. She thought it was unnecessary. All that sentiment, the month she'd been living in the city. Jenna preferred to savor her superiority. She liked to throw money around, to see the admiring glances of the staff. After the second trip to the village, she called the same friend who had helped her with the genetic test. Julia was still working in the laboratory. When she heard the voice of her old friend, Julia tensed up a little. What do you want again? She tried to forget that story and didn't want to have any more dealings with Jenna, because she realized that where Jenna was, there was a catch. But her friend said something on the phone, saying that she had flown in for a week from Milan and just wanted to meet. Finally, Julia agreed. They met in a cafe, sat, and talked nicely. Julia waited for her friend to say the main thing. Finally, Jenna was ripe. Julia, do you want to go to Italy? I can introduce you to a very powerful man there. My Matteo has a friend. He's in his 60s, but he's very good looking. He's also fabulously rich and a widower. Jenna winked conspiratorially. I think he'll like you. We'll go to boutiques together, take vacations. How do you like it here? Cautiously answered Julia. Oh, come on. She's not fooling herself. It's good for her to be over 30 and all alone. I'm right. Well, and look how beautiful you are. Men don't appreciate you. And why do you need a bunch of trash? There's a real millionaire over there. I'm sure you'll do well with him. Will you fly with me? No, Jenna, I wouldn't dream of it. I'm fine here. Okay, I gotta go. Julia got up, but her friend grabbed her arm. You don't want to marry a millionaire. Then you'll go to jail, Jenna said quietly. Sit down. What are you talking about? Julia turned pale and obediently sat down. Have you forgotten the DNA story? I haven't forgotten. Well, I could whisper it to the police, and that would be interesting. Why would you do that? You're the one who's involved. What did I do? The test came out. Jenna let go of her friend's hand. I could have asked you for anything, but it's not like I committed a service crime. You did everything, if you remember, for free. I honestly believed you wanted Michael back. Muffled, Julia replied. And I'm just us, smiled Jenna. But you can't prove that. Just like you can't prove you didn't take the money. What do you want? Among me with the right people who can pick up the baby and take it across the border, I'll pay you well. Are you out of your mind? Don't yell, said Jenna. And don't act like a girl. You work in a place where all sorts of people turn and not easy. So think about who I can turn to. Did you ever think I might report you to the police? And what will you say? That you cheated an honest man 5 years ago? This conversation, you can't prove anything. Julia realized only now that she made a mistake by not turning on the tape recorder. A recording would be good now, she sighed. On second thought, I'll try to help you. But afterward, forget my phone number and forget I exist at all. Sure, honey. If you don't want to meet a promising man, yeah, go ahead. You snapped at Julia, got up and left. And the next day, she did call Jenna. There's a man who can help you, but I'm not sure, Julia said. You call him yourself and talk to him. And she dictated a phone number to Jenna. This man was a criminal figure in town. He went to the clinic when he suspected his wife of cheating on him and thought his son wasn't his. The man's fears were in vain. He left the clinic quietly, but his phone number remains. Julia heard that the flow of nurses about the activities of this man, but immediately did not pay attention. Gossip, nothing more. But now I remembered. Found the number in the file cabinet and gave it to Jenna. Let her talk to him herself. That and the criminal identity was a Jacob. He's a really complicated man. When he got a call from an unknown woman making an appointment, he thought that another lady decided to settle scores with her husband or lover. But when Jenna explained what needed to be done, Jacob at first refused, especially because it is very troublesome to deal with delivery abroad. But when Jenna told him the fee, he thought about it. Okay, let's give it a try. He finally agreed. Anna woke up early that morning. There was an uneasy feeling in her soul. Anna stretched, took a deep breath. Apparently, she had a bad dream, but she couldn't remember which one. Stop worrying about it. Anna, time to get up, the woman said to herself. And indeed, there was a lot of work for today. The men are retiring today. We must supervise the work. Anna had a quick breakfast, stopped by Jack's. Her bunny is asleep. She smiled and then sighed. Her son again will be without her all day. The daycare is under renovation. Good thing Kate is always on hand. Just when she thought of her neighbor, she heard the door creak open. Here you are, Kate. What are you going to the neighbor? Asked the old lady. The idea is that you and I can manage on our own. I'll cook something for him now. He'll wake up for breakfast, and then we'll go to my garden. Raspberries are coming up. We'll pick them. And then we'll find something else to do. Don't worry. Your little boy will be well looked after. I'm not worried. Kate, you are my main assistant. What would I do without you? Anna smiled gratefully. She got into the car and drove out of the village to the forest, where the farm equipment was already making noise. On the way, Anna thought, maybe she should have sent Jack to town to Michael's parents or to her own. Both of them offered to look after you this month, while the daycare center was being repaired, but she couldn't even imagine being left without her son for even 24 hours. And my son would miss you. Yes, only on the grandmother neighbor, and there is all hope. Having checked the work of Kosarev, Anna together with James hurried to the district center. Suddenly, they were summoned to the agricultural department to sign documents. They returned from the district center close to lunchtime. Anna dropped James off and drove to her house. On the way, she met a dark SUV. The woman thought it was someone else's car. I wonder who was visiting? Then she drove up to her yard, seeing the open door. Anna frowned. This isn't right. What was it Kate hadn't followed? What if Jack was running away? Or the neighbor's chickens would come in and block all her flower beds? Then she heard a faint scream and cry from the house. Anna rushed there. Kate was lying on the floor, crying and trying to get up. Kate, what's wrong? Shouted Anna, ran over to her neighbor and helped her up. Oh, nurse, trouble. I did not follow the water, and wiping her tears, the old lady told how she and Jack and came from the vegetable garden with fresh raspberries. Kate was in the kitchen. Berries with milk and sugar mixed to dessert kettle, boiling in the bathtub in the hallway, with which Jack played. Suddenly a car stopped outside the house. Dark so Kate had not seen it before. Two stout men entered the house. One of them grabbed Jack in his arms, and they turned toward the door. Kate ran out to meet them. Then one of the strangers pushed the old woman. Kate fell, hit her head, and lost consciousness for a few moments. When she came to her senses, neither the bandits nor the child were in the house. Anna, forgive me, I didn't save our Jack. The old lady was crying. Kate, don't blame yourself for anything. Anna said in a trembling voice, what would you do against two bandits? God, why would they want Jack? Anna called an ambulance and the police, and jumped into her car and followed the bandits. Now she knew exactly what kind of car she had seen on the way. There was only one road, and Anna was sure she would catch up with the bandits. She raced along the dusty road, but in vain. The woman stopped the car, dropped her head on the steering wheel, and sobbed. She was afraid to imagine where her baby was now, what he was experiencing. And then she froze. She realized who could have taken her baby. It was Jenna. There was no one else. And just as she thought about it, How did a police car show up on the road? It was a task force on their way to her call. Anna jumped out of the car and began to explain to the investigator who she was, what had happened. She voiced her suspicions. Well, let's not waste any time. The investigator agreed with her arguments and called his colleagues in the regional center to find out more about this Jenna and, if possible, detain her. Law enforcers promptly began to work, but the only person they found was Jenna. She did not live quietly in her hotel room, and when the police guards swooped in on her, was in complete bewilderment, took the child. Rounded her eyes. Oh, really? How could I have organized all this? The coroner didn't have a single clue. The number of the car that came to the village. No one remembered only the color and make of the surveillance cameras. Of course, there were none along the road. The investigator suggested another version, maybe he was taken for ransom. But so far no one had called. She was sure it was Jenna's doing. And while all the cops were investigating, Marjane, all sorts of men were also on the job under James' direction. The men searched the neighborhood for woods, lakes, abandoned houses, but they couldn't find anything. In the meantime, Jacob had brought little Jack to the mountains. Jacob was glad that he had managed to skip all the checkpoints of the traffic police so successfully. Driving on a road where cameras are minimal, he wasn't too worried about that. The plates on the car weren't real. And the driver was wearing a cap. He's in the backseat with the kid. In short, nobody's gonna find them. Jacob left Jack at the abandoned house. In the evening on another car, he planned to take the child to the border region. And there he has friends who will help to transport the boy. One thing made him a little uneasy. The child was scared, crying all the time and calling for his mother. Jacob was not a beast, and he felt sorry for the boy. He already regretted that he got involved in this adventure, but there was a decent sum at stake, and it was too late to back out. Why are you crying? He pleaded with Jack. We'll go to your mom soon. Really, wiping away tears, the child asked and looked trustingly into the eyes of this big uncle. Of course. Mommy asked me to bring you. Why did you hit Granny Katya? Who hit her? She just fell down. She's all right now. Jacob consoled the child and made a vow not to get involved in such cases again. And maybe he would have succeeded. But then the police got an anonymous call. It was a woman, and she said she knew who had taken the child. She gave the name Jacob. Then it was just a matter of time. Law enforcement located Jacob. Soon he and the driver were apprehended on the way out of town. In the back seat was Jack. When they reported that the boy was found, the woman almost fainted from excitement and then cried. But already her little one had been found. It's been over a year. All those responsible for that story have been punished. Jacob and his partner got decent sentences. Jenna was also convicted for organizing the crime. In addition, her Italian husband divorced her. Julia, who called the police, got off lightly. The court took into account her assistance to the investigation, and she went as a witness. However, she was fired from the lab. Management did not want a person with a questionable past working in their institution. At the trial, of course, many facts came out, such as the fact that Jack was not Michael's son. Michael's parents were very upset when they found out, but eventually they calmed down and accepted Jack as their own. Anna's parents were also very surprised. But how can you refuse a little man who firmly entered their family? Anna and her son lived in their village. Those terrible events began to be forgotten. And then Anna had another meeting with a man she already knew a little. But who would have thought that fate would bring them together? Spring that year was not in a hurry. At the end of April, it was still snowing straight orange at night. Anna was worried it was time to plow the fields. Where to drive the tractor? It will get stuck in the field up to its ears. And the deadline is pressing in June. The heat will crush it. And the sprouts, if they don't have time to gain strength, will be pulled out. What kind of harvest will we have in the end? James sighed too. The weather is not good for farmers this year. And then somehow in a couple of days, the weather explained the sun heating soaked through. It soaked the water and the ground. The work was booming. Anna was amused, James encouraged. He had plans to open up a spit between the shards. There the winds would not blow so much, and the moisture would be preserved if the summer was dry. Anna agreed with the manager's decision. The case says the plot has been registered for her for a long time. There are no problems. This year, the field is plowed once, and then the grain is sown. It's going to produce good wheat. James laughed, saying that he had become a real agronomist over the years, that she had learned to understand the business for so many years. And one morning, the tractors came to this plot. The mechanizers knew their business, soon worked, and there was a small hill there by the forest. It had always been there as long as the locals remembered, but no one had ever attached any importance to it. Well, it was blown by the wind for many centuries, so the tractor driver decided to store this hill too. Why does it stand idle? He drove once in the election into the ground for the second time, and then he saw something plowing in the forest. He nodded, went out to look. I thought the tractor's spare parts had fallen off. I came closer and my eyes. In the ground, some shards, some iron pieces. Another tractor driver drove up, scratched Jack in the back of his head. We seem to have opened a mound. He guessed. Oh, come on. What kind of mound we might have here? I don't know what kind. The people used to live here. And notice, in the Soviet years, they didn't plow here. Why? Maybe they knew about the mound. And then everything was forgotten. So maybe we'll write it down quietly, and they'll have problems later. You can't be patted on the head for such things. They've had enough of our ducks. The tractor driver agreed, having opened the hill. It should be said that farm workers often called one thing among themselves simply Anna or Duck. Kindly so fondly. Yes, the workers appreciated their young mistress, respected, knowing what a hard fate fell to her. The mechanics called. They told her everything. Soon she came with James. What is it? Anna asked in amazement. Examining the pieces of clay shards, it was obvious that the ancient they decided to call archaeologists out of sin. Let them decide how to proceed. Because if it is recognized later, you cannot avoid fines. A couple of days later, the specialists arrived, settled in a tent near the forest, and began to study, to dig out the very hill. Anna has a lot of work to do. Still, she wondered what the archaeologists had found there. One afternoon, she drove up to the excavation site. 4 men were just resting, drinking tea in a clearing. Hello, Anna. One of them said hello first. Come to us to drink tea. Anna wondered how this archaeologist knew her. I don't think we've met. Taking the closer look. Strong build, stocky with a small beard. Or have you seen him around? Didn't recognize her? The man smiled. I'm Robert, remember, came to see you. Anna gasped. Exactly the same Robert who was searching for his family's treasure. She was so afraid he'd ask her for compensation for the jewelry. Well, no, it's a good thing we parted ways, Robert. So you're an archaeologist now. I used to be an archaeologist. I teach at the Institute. And then we got word that they found a burial mound. So I decided to check it out with my colleagues. Then maybe I'll bring my students here for an internship. Do you mind? How could I mind? Anna smiled. Who's going to ask me much? It will probably be a shame that you had to stop working. There is a little, but nothing, we'll get over it. You sit down and have tea with us. We were talking like this. Anna joined the group of archaeologists. Robert and his colleagues turned out to be sociable guys. They chatted. They laughed. Anna left the field in a good mood. So much for the field. Let the historians work. Soon it turned out that this mound was actually valuable. In it were found objects of everyday life of people, other tribes. Robert began to see Anna more and more often. Sometimes he came to visit her. They spent a long time in the gazebo. Jack would hang around. What a wonderful son you have, Robert once said and sighed sadly for some reason. Do you have children? Careful, Anna asked. No, my wife didn't want to. She kept saying she had to live for herself. Now it's over. That everyone's separated. My wife, Robert, and I told her he'd been married for almost 10 years. His wife, Nancy, worked with him at the same institute. Everything was fine between them. And then his wife confessed that she'd met her first love. And it's been 6 months since they divorced. That's sad. But I'm sure you'll meet your love again, Anna said. You're a very good man and decent. I'm still so grateful to you. You didn't make a fuss about those jewels. You could have. I didn't do the right thing back then. I should have turned in the jewelry instead of selling it to a third party. You were saving a child?" Robert answered her firmly. "I had no moral right to demand anything from you." "Yes, but I confess to you, I have now spent some of the money on the development of my farm. Perhaps I should reimburse you for that amount. We'll harvest in the fall. Then I'll be able to pay you back." "You don't have to pay anything back. You invested the money in the development of the land, which means additional jobs, life in the countryside. I see how hard you work. I hear what people in the neighborhood are saying about you." "What do they say?" Anna smiled. "That you are a very good leader and not a bad person. Only that only happiness is not smiling at you. So one old lady in the store said my happiness is my son." Anna nodded her head confidently. Robert smiled back and winked at Jack, who was already clearly mocking sitting next to his mom. Anna noticed it, and she wanted to take the boy in her arms. But Robert volunteered to help. He brought Jack into the house. Anna laid her son down. Then they stood in the yard looking at the stars for a long time. "Anna, can I ask you another question?" Robert asked, breaking the silence of the night. Anna shrugged her shoulders and nodded in response. "Did you love your husband much?" Anna only sighed, answered nothing, and only nodded her head again. She raised her head and looked up at the sky. Once Michael was standing next to her, and there was happiness. And then what had happened had happened. Her husband's betrayal of him and his infidelity and his remorse. And then Jack's child, essentially a stranger who had become his wife's closest family. Anna looked at Robert and said, "Yes, I loved Michael, but it's all in the past." And they looked at each other carefully. Then, as if remembering, they both became embarrassed and began to say goodbye. In the fall, Robert left for the city. So soon the school year would begin. He said goodbye to Anna on the way to the district center. The woman was just standing by the field and was looking carefully into the distance. Thinking about something, Robert saw her from the car and asked the cab driver to slow down. Anna turned around. Hearing the noise of the car, Robert was already rushing towards her. "Anna, I already thought that I would not see you for goodbye." Was there a shadow on the woman's face? "Yes, the lectures at the Institute start in a week. I have to be there. Although, to be honest, I don't really want to go back. I like the field conditions. Yes, I am accustomed to such conditions, since student and archaeological trips was, I really like this way of life. But this time it's for a different reason, which is I don't want to leave you." Robert looked into her eyes. Anna was confused and did not know what to answer. She too was sad that Robert was leaving. She was used to their meetings, their conversations, their walks. But to say it was beyond her. "I'm sorry, what confused you?" Robert said quietly. "You were minding your own business. I was here." "No, it's fine. I was just planning to plant a garden on this spot years ago, but Michael never got around to it. And now the idea's come to life. Do you think I can do it?" "You'll do fine," Robert smiled. He suddenly took her hand and kissed it, then abruptly stepped aside. "See you later," and walked with a quick step to the car. "See you later," Anna's lips whispered. And then it was again winter-long cold. In the late evenings, Anna put her son to bed and sat in an armchair, covered with a blanket, and remembered the events of the past years. Yes, a lot of things had happened in her life, but somehow it all turned out to be just a dream. What would happen next in her life? Again work, home, worries about her son. All that's fine and all that's right. But her heart wanted something more. Anna realized that she was chasing these thoughts away, and she just wanted love. And not just some phantom love, but real love. And there was someone she thought of all the time, Robert. But the man left, so she never called her. She did not call him, and she out of pride. Yes, sometimes she wanted to dial his phone number, but Anna restrained herself. What will she say to him? "How are you?" That's all. She remembered their goodbye, and her heart clenched sweetly. It seemed to her that she could still feel the touch of his lips on her palm. He never called. Then one day, just before Christmas, there was a knock at the door. Anna and Jack were just decorating the tree. Anna thought it was Kate, a frequent visitor to their house. "Kate, come in," Anna shouted. The door opened and a man in a thick down coat and a hat appeared on the doorstep. She didn't immediately realize who it was. Finally, she recognized him. "Oh, Robert." Uncle Robert joyfully shouted Jack and rushed to hug the guest. "Jack, I'm from Frost." Robert laughed joyfully and at the same time looked hesitantly at the babysitter. She stared, confused, not knowing what to say. Presently, Uncle Robert took off his jacket and hugged her. "Then you're welcome." She finally realized she didn't have to beg Robert twice. He took off his jacket, hugged Jack tightly, and then handed him some kind of package. "Here, I met Santa Claus on the street. He told me to tell you," he winked at the boy. "Oh, Uncle Robert, I'm not a little kid anymore. You bought this, didn't you?" Jack laughed and pulled a big red remote control car out of the bags. "Wow, it's so cool." The boy went to play in the room. Anna took the guest to the kitchen and poured tea. She was able to cope with her emotions and looked quite calm. "It's a surprise. I hope you enjoyed it," Robert said. He paused and added, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not calling. I couldn't." And Robert told me what had happened to him. When he arrived in the city in mid-September, Robert had a retake with third-year students. Among the students was a certain Maria, a girl who was stupid but had rich parents. She predictably failed the exam. After Maria came to Robert at the department and begged him to give her at least a C, Robert only advised her to study the subject and prepare for the exam with the committee. "Robert, be a man. Give her a C," Maria insisted. "Maria, you are wasting my time and yours," Robert told her. He started filling out the report card. "Robert, and I can be grateful." He looked at her in surprise and only shook his head. Everyone knew that Robert was incorruptible and a teacher, but Maria had no intention of backing down. While Robert was filling out the report card, she stood next to him. He didn't even look at her, and then he looked up and went numb. Maria had unbuttoned her blouse and was staring at him intently. "Don't you want to?" Quietly, she said. "Maria, fix your clothes." Only he said. "You'll be sorry," she whispered. And then the unimaginable happened. Maria suddenly screamed loudly. Then she jumped out of the department and ran crying through the institute. She made it look as if Robert had molested her. She was against it. Then Maria told the dean that Robert had repeatedly molested her, and that's why he fired her during the exams. And Maria believed all Maria believed, largely due to the intervention of her influential father, who had roared so much indignation. Robert tried in vain to prove that it was all nonsense. He was suspended from his job. Criminal charges were filed. It is not known how it would have ended, but helped his ex-wife Nancy, although she left him for another, was still a decent person. Her current husband was a lawyer, and it was he who confused the case, insisted on a polygraph. It was only then that Maria was found to be lying. She was expelled from the university. Even her father didn't help. Before Robert, the management of the institute apologized and invited her back to work. But after everything, Robert could not imagine how he would work with students, communicate with colleagues who yesterday were ready to throw stones at him. Robert quit. What to do next? He didn't know. Yes, all this time he had been thinking about Anna, wanting to call her, to hear her voice, but he didn't dare. But just before Christmas, he suddenly realized he couldn't do that. If you love someone, you have to tell them. And there he is at Anna's. They look into each other's eyes. "I love you," Robert said quietly. "I just want you to know that. Except now, I'm not a college professor. I'm just an unemployed guy. And I guess you don't want that, do you?" "Yes," Anna whispered back. The three of them spent Christmas together, and it was the beginning of a new life. And in the spring, Robert started to work actively. The former historian turned out to be a capable worker. He was especially good at gardening. Having studied over the winter all the records and books of Anna's ex-husband, he began to organize the garden. Apple trees, cherry trees, raspberries, currants. Robert started with simple plantings. He was in the garden all day long. Sometimes he'd spend the night on the allotment. But he practically banished her from the garden when she tried to help. "You got enough work to do. Go to the office," Robert used to say. Of course, he didn't work alone. He had 5 hired help. And it was very hard work, the fruits of which are not immediately visible. And so 5 years passed. On the site of the former field were colorful young trees, apple trees bent from the branches of white cherries. Rows of raspberries and currants stretched in smooth rows, studded with large berries. Robert also planted in his garden plum pear. There were apricot and apricot trees. There was a grapevine. Here for fruits and berries went not only residents of the district, but also from the region, as on excursions several times brought important officials. In short, the glory of Orchard rattled far beyond. A small village. Robert was very tired, but the orchard became his brainchild, the meaning of life. Although he had other things in mind. His family. They themselves signed just after that first Christmas they spent together. At first, Anna was all business too, but gradually she got sidetracked. The woman realized she just wanted to be a woman, an angel, and a horse. Anna stayed at home more and more, occupied with her son, created a cozy field, and the farm was now managed by James' son Timothy. He had learned all the skills from his father and was doing quite well. Sometimes Anna, looking at the ears and the orchards in the field, the cow on the rise, thought, could Michael have imagined that his business would turn out like this? He probably would have been happy. But she remembered her first husband with a slight sadness, of course. And now she loved only Robert. And 2 years after the second marriage, Anna suddenly felt bad. She felt dizzy and nauseous. Anna had some doubts, but it was unbelievable. She went to see a doctor, and the doctor at the district polyclinic rejoiced her. She's pregnant. How could that be? I was told before that there was no chance. She asked the doctor. There is always a chance, smiled the doctor. And your case is proof of that. When Robert found out about his wife's pregnancy, he was the happiest man in the world. There would soon be 4 of them. But he was a little wrong. In the 4th month, an ultrasound revealed that Anna was expecting twins. And it was a total delight. Anna gave birth to a boy and a girl on her due date. Jack was especially happy, because now he has a little brother and a little sister. And he's the big brother, their protector. The only thing that bothered the grown-up boy was whether he would be loved as before. One day he asked his mom about it. My little one. Anna smiled. Our love is not going anywhere. You will forever be our eldest and favorite boy and kin. Of course I will. Why do you ask? Jack was silent for a moment, then confessed that Grandma Tanya, Anna's mom, had recently told him to say Suritin. Jack knew that Papa Roma wasn't his own. But his grandmother's mom only sighed. Then the boy heard her talking to his grandfather. Grandma Tanya said she was working. You see, it's an omen. When you bring an orphan into the house, then your own children will be born. That's how Anna adopted Jack. That's how it worked out. The boy didn't understand everything. But the fact that his mother had adopted him was firmly planted in his mind. He didn't say anything at first. He cried quietly to his mom, and then he asked if his mom needed him. Anna had to confess to her son, but she told him 1,000 times that she had always loved him and would always love him. And Robert joined the conversation, assuring that Jack is the most, that there is a native person to them. Their love, their care soothed the child's worries. Anna told her mother everything afterward. That's who was pulling her tongue. Betty just made a sour face. It's my fault. Anna just waved her hand. What's she gonna ask of her mom? Thanks for helping me out in a difficult situation. And the fact that he said too much, so maybe it's for the best. After all, the secret is always revealed, and it is important to say everything correctly and in time. And so those 5 years passed. How Robert and Anna got married. Jack is 12, Daria and Kevin are 3 years old. The boys are very friendly. Jack is mom's first mommy's helper. He takes the kids for walks, reads books, and plays with them. Daria and Kevin are like tails after him. They love Jack and he loves them. Anna sometimes thinks, looking at her husband and children, did she ever imagine that everything would turn out this way? Certainly, there was not a terrible loss in her life that could have broken her whole life. Then the secrets that came after that loss. And her husband's infidelity could have broken her too. But she endured because then the power of motherhood was already manifested in her to the highest degree. Yes, she wanted to be a mom, and she became one. Jack's illness showed that there are a lot of wonderful people around who can come to the rescue. And family people in this situation sometimes perform a miracle. A miracle. Yes, a miracle happened in her life. When a dead-end situation became the beginning of a new path for a new turn in her life. She met Robert at first and never thought it would turn into something more. Yes, she met some bad people along the way, but life punished them. So what's next? What's next is a quiet, measured life and happiness.
Subscribe and click the bell.
We can finish here. The head of the legal department of the ECO Construction Company folded the documents neatly into a plastic folder and smiled. Gentlemen, I suggest we finish our meeting at the restaurant. There's a great seafood restaurant here at the hotel. The table's set. We can go downstairs right now. The deputy general manager waved his hand hospitably toward the elevators. I sighed. We had just signed a lucrative contract that our firm had been pursuing for years. But the last thing I wanted to do was spend the evening in a restaurant. To be honest, I missed my wife and son. We've been living together for 5 years now, but I still lose my head like a boy when I see my wife. I guess I'm a one-woman man, and there's nothing I can do about it. I can't bear to be away from my family. As I stacked up the signed papers, I puzzled over what reason I could come up with to go home today. If I leave now, I'll be home by morning. True, it's quite a long drive, almost 500 kilometers. But that's okay. I have long been used to long distances and abnormal situations. Ever since I was in the Army, Robert, I'm very embarrassed, but I won't be able to attend the banquet. There are problems at home, so I'm leaving right now. In any case, you will visit our firm soon, and I will do my best to make up for my departure today. I made up an excuse on the fly and now tried not to look in the eyes of the general. That's okay, Christopher. After all, the banquet is not the main purpose of our meeting. I think we still have a lot to do. Robert smiled, and we shook hands firmly. In my room, I changed my clothes, packed my shirt and business suit in a plastic bag, pulled on the usual camouflage for the helm of my boots, and put a silver medallion on a leather lanyard around my neck. In such clothes, I felt much freer and more confident. Without wasting time, I threw my things into the car, checked the note, and in half an hour drove off the ring road onto the highway leading to my hometown. At home, thank God, I was fine, no problems. I just wanted to hug my beloved wife and son quickly. Gradually, it was getting dark. It was early fall before the prolonged rains, and the first frosts were still far away. The road was deserted. Only at the bends roadside bushes sprinkled on me, caught out of the darkness by the headlights of my car. The engine ran smoothly without strain. I lightly stoked the gas pedal, bringing the speed to 120 kilometers per hour. The cruising speed of my car. I myself rebuilt the engine vectors, spent almost a month, rewelded the sills, scaled holes, and painted. The car is a real Japanese, made for the USA. Got it to me for a ridiculous price. I remember the surprised, squeamish face of my wife and brother. But frankly, I didn't care about that. The main thing was that I liked the car. My grandfather, my father's father at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, confidently held on to the chair of the general director of the metallurgical plant. I don't know how, but after a while he became its owner. He managed in this turbulent time not only to save the plant, and accordingly, the workplaces, but also by carrying out reconstruction, to reach the leading positions in its branch in our country. Time passed. The plant prospered. Grandfather managed to buy and build several more production facilities, expanding the scope of his activities. One of the new areas of activity was the organization of production of steel structures for construction. This direction was headed by his son, my father. Today, on his behalf, I signed a lucrative contract for the manufacture and supply of steel, load-bearing beams for a huge construction company, bringing my father's firm to a new level. But despite some independence, all the threads of management of the huge household were at my grandfather. There are 2 of us in the family, Me and my brother, we are twins. We are already over 30 untrained people can't tell us apart. At first, our parents could hardly distinguish us. I'm the oldest. 20 minutes after I was born, Stephen was born, and that sealed my fate. I don't know why, but my parents gave all their love to their younger son, forced to measure with my existence. Everything was for Stephen. Toys, tutoring. As the eldest, I had to defer to my younger brother in everything. No one was interested in my interests and desires. Stephen went to tutors, studied music, always wore a clean suit, and learned good manners. I grew up on my own. I taught myself to play guitar and enrolled in the hand-to-hand combat section. I studied averagely, but after the 9th pressed on studying and soon was in the first 5 on academic performance. What to be? I didn't think much about it. I was easily given to exact sciences, and I was going to enter the Mechanical Engineering Institute, but life arranged otherwise. In 11th grade, I fell in love. The girl was wonderful. Our relationship was extremely serious, and we decided to get married right after school. Adriana was also going to university. We decided to be a couple and live together in a dormitory. They were willing to give us a room. I took everything into account, except one thing. 2 weeks before the wedding, when I had already bought the rings, Adriana called me and stammered and asked me to meet her. Okay, no problem. We agreed to meet at the park near the fountain. I knew the place well, as I often went there with Adriana to dance. I arrived early and had time to smoke while waiting for the bride. Finally, Adriana appeared, and not alone. She was holding Stephen, dressed in his trademark jeans and leather jacket. When she saw me, she abruptly let go of his hand and came over to me. "Hi, you've been waiting a long time." As if it mattered now, it was clear to me. Stephen couldn't get over the fact that I had a girlfriend. Like everything else, she had to be his. I shrugged silently. We don't need to see each other anymore. My ex-fiancée carefully averted her eyes. All the sorrow in the world seemed to be centered in her shaky voice. I was in love. Adriana, I understand. I don't need to explain. I caught my brother's triumphant look. I turned and headed out of the park. The next day, I went to the enlistment office and applied to join the Army. My father was indifferent to my decision. I did not voice the reason for my decision. My mother didn't care about me. She was busy with another extended shopping somewhere abroad. So within 2 weeks, I received a summons, passed a medical examination, and was drafted into the internal troops. At the recruitment center, I was sent to the intelligence of internal troops, having scrutinized my body for the presence of tattoos. On my perplexed look, the warrant officer paramedic said a tattoo for a scout as a business card. It remains to fill the last name on the ass for full happiness. Remember, kid, tattoos are for prisoners, morons, and prostitutes. And so began my service in intelligence. I was a tough and stubborn guy. Soon I began to do well in the service. By the end of the first year, I was already a sergeant, a squad leader. I tried to study military science well. I finished sniper courses, learned to drive a car in extreme conditions. I achieved good results in hand-to-hand combat. I was offered to take tests for the right to carry a green ticket. I passed them the first time. Several times I was in hot spots as part of my company. For participation in one operation, I was even awarded the Medal of Honor. I don't know for what reason my call sign was a connecting rod. It happened 2 months before the end of my service. I was ordered to take an artillery adjuster to an observation post and cover him while he worked. The winter sun was already rolling toward sunset. It got very cold. Breathing scouts. Fog beat between the leafless trees, sticking out here and there on the slope, from where the adjuster dictated the coordinates of the targets. Finally, the crimson sun was finally hidden behind the horizon, which meant that not a single ray of it could give us away, repelling the attack through binoculars or telescopic sights. In the distance, a mountain river rushed southward with a gray ribbon. On its left bank, the enemy was concentrating its forces. The task of the squad was as simple as a song, to stay undetected for as long as possible, and to identify enemy targets as much as possible, and to get away as quietly as possible. Further worked artillery. The adjuster was already finishing to transmit the coordinates. The target, as on us from the rear, struck a machine gun. Bullets with a horse crashed into the world-evil ground. Around me shrieked and dropped his head adjuster. I snapped back with short bursts from my Kalashnikov rifle, trying not to let the enemy get too close. It was completely dark, and I could barely make out the silhouettes of the enemy. I tried to contact the company commander over the intercom, but there was only crackling in my headphones. The enemy is competently jamming our frequency, not giving the opportunity to establish a stable connection from our side. No one was firing anymore. My fighters were probably all killed. A click and my machine gun went silent. I was out of ammo. I pulled out my Stetkin pistol and pulled the bolt. Two shadows rushed toward me from the right, not aiming. I fired several times in their direction. It seemed to hit. I realized that I could not get out. But that was the order. I turned to the killed adjuster and, covering myself with his body, I flicked the radio switch, switched to the spare frequency, and began to transmit my coordinates, thus calling the artillery fire on myself. The machine gunner detected my movement and opened fire again. I felt the bullets pounding into the dead body. I wasn't scared. I was just mentally dead already, clearly realizing that only a miracle could save me. The last thing I remembered was the whistling of shells and the rumble of bursts all around me. Then the remnants of my squad made their way to me and pulled me stunned to the rear. I didn't even have a scratch, just a slight contusion. Apparently, God still needed me for something. Just before I was discharged, we who survived that battle at a jeweler we know, we ordered medallions as a souvenir. The material we had was a broken silver cross we found in a ruined Orthodox church, enough for everyone. Only 7 people survived that battle. The time of service flew by quickly, and I was soon demobilized. I took away with me the medal for bravery at the station. To my great surprise, I was met by Zareknaya, former fiancée. Adriana frantically clutched at the sleeve of my camouflage and sobbed hysterically, asking for forgiveness. I even felt a little sorry for her, but I ripped her fingers with red-painted nails from the sleeve and, without saying a word, walked to the cab stand. She remained standing on the platform, hands clasped in despair, looking at me with tearful eyes. "You can't forgive traitors." Yeah, I guess her life with my majority didn't work out. Brothers, my parents had moved to a mansion outside of town. Stephen, who had graduated from the capital's technical university and was already vice president of my father's firm for economic relations, lived with them. I didn't go home for a few months. I stayed with a bachelor army friend. I applied to the Institute of Mechanical Engineering, arranged to live in a dormitory. I had no desire to meet my relatives, and even less with my brother. A month after my return, my grandfather found me. We drank tea with him for a long time in a small room in the dormitory. And then he unexpectedly offered me a job at the Combine as an auxiliary worker in the machine shop. What did you think? A director. I needed the money. The work schedule was flexible enough, so I accepted. I worked that way for almost 5 years. I met a pretty girl named Betty at a party, and after 6 months of courting, I got married. I didn't plan a big wedding on her, but on the day of the wedding, my parents came to our banquet with a table. Betty was shocked. She stared at my brother and me for a long time, marveling at our resemblance. My father gave us an apartment and a car for the wedding. My young wife was over the moon. She did a slow dance with my father and brother. And at the end of the evening, I happened to catch a lustful glimpse of my wife alone. A year later, we had a son out of happiness. I was as if in space. We lived with our relatives. Stephen stopped by to visit us a couple of times, but no creeping towards Betty on his part. I did not notice. 6 months ago, I successfully graduated from the institute, and my father appointed me deputy head of the marketing department. In my firm, I was directly subordinate to my brother. I started traveling, auditors, signing contracts. Everywhere Stephen put me. My wife was initially dissatisfied with my frequent absence, but then she got used to it. That's how we lived all this time. The car brought the hell back. I think I dozed off, took to the curb and pulled over. Turned on the emergency lights, got out of the car, and did a few push-ups. Patted myself on the cheeks. It was early. I began to fall asleep still, only the first hour smoothly moved from the place. The road like a gray snake wriggled under the wheels. Behind the next corner of the headlights illuminated a large black car pressed against the curb. I could clearly see a thin female silhouette desperately struggling between the two large black figures. Her chances of success were practically non-existent. The highway was empty at this time, and there would be no one to help her. I looked up at the sky. The torn disk of the moon was serenely casting a bright light on the road. Buttman was not visible, and they are not found in our area. Not many people scream in the night, caught in the clutches of a merciless predator. Alas, such is the prose of life. Tomorrow they'll find the corpse of a young girl in the roadside bushes. And I haven't slept. I haven't sobered up yet. After last night's drunkenness, the operative will swear to himself. But look, the scene will start a criminal case, which will never solve another grouse. After a while, the girl's body will get to the cemetery, and the file with the case will eventually settle in the archives. I got out of the car. Two big young men, dragging desperate highway patrolmen. A girl in a black SUV. She tried to scratch and bite, but a slap on the back of the SUV's right rear window was missing, and a light cigarette smoke was wafting from it. Finally, the guys rolled the woman up and carried her to the car. It was clear how this was all going to end. The thugs paid no attention to the blue Suzuki. Too small a bite could drive such a Kolimamaga. I headed leisurely toward the black car, hiding my baseball bat behind my back for the time being. And I was told it wouldn't come in handy. Oh yes, it is. The girl realized the situation had changed and started lashing out again. I got close to the participants in the crime drama. Apparently, in some subconscious way, the dashing fighters realized that the one who approached was not just a sucker. A beastly sense of danger had penetrated their uncluttered brains. "Let the girl go," I said firmly. As soon as the nearest thug tried to say something, I hit him in the face with a bat, without swinging. As instructor Petrenko taught, there was a characteristic crunch and the opponent fell on his side. The second one let the girl out of his hands and rushed at me. He tilted his head like a bull. I took a step to the side and with the knuckles of my fist, hit him in the temple. He collapsed on top of his coworker without a hitch. A car door slammed. A third character appeared, a pistol gleaming in the moonlight. I moved out of his line of sight, and in one leap I was next to him, tail on top of his Barrett, and pressed the magazine eject button. It was heard as it fell to the asphalt. At the same time, I turned on the safety flag. The subject, who had not raised anything, pressed the trigger time after time, but no shot was fired. I pulled the gun out of the poor guy's hands and with a palm strike on the codex, knocked him out. I bent over and lifted the magazine. There was silence. The girl had disappeared. A red shoe and purse lay on the pavement. I pulled out my knife and carefully slashed all four tires. Sharp honed tans easily opened the rubber, once again inspected the battlefield, and headed to my car. Shoved the trophy pistol under the seat. Just a moment, and I was already driving on the highway again. After 500 meters, I saw a girl with a limp, walking briskly in my direction. She didn't even know to hide in the roadside bushes. I pulled up beside her. "Get in." I opened the right front door. She looked at me stunned. "Get in, don't be afraid." They drove off. She stood silently for a while, then hesitantly climbed into the front seat. "Here." I handed her a bag and a shoe like yours. She silently took her things and clutched them to her chest. She didn't look in my direction. "Where are you going?" I asked the right question. To my amazement, she named my city. I smiled and increased my speed. As we pulled in, I knew her story. The girl's name was Kathy. 20 years old, Father gone, mother alcoholic. Last year, Kathy finished school and came to the capital. She didn't get into university, tried to find a job, but couldn't. A friend offered to earn money with her body. A pimp showed up. They took her passport and let her get away with it. She's been at it for over a year. So far, the young one's a success. Then they'll put her on drugs and sell her to an underground brothel. In 3 years, she'll die of an overdose. It's a short story, but it's so real. Knifely was taken with a friend to a client tonight. He likes them young. The friend stayed, and she went home to the city I live in. Cab driver started harassing her, got his, and threw her out of the car. Then these 3 guys showed up in a black Lexus. I don't know how it would have ended if it wasn't for me. We got into town early in the morning. I dropped off my passenger at the address, a crumbling 1-story cinder block barracks. I drove home. On the way, I stopped by a convenience store and bought a bouquet of flowers, candy, and a bottle of champagne. There was an unfamiliar car in my parking space. Strange. I went up to my floor and opened the door to my apartment. I walked into the kitchen, put the bottle on the table, and headed for the bedroom. Trying not to make any noise, I opened the door. They lay cuddled together like newlyweds. Betty laid her head on his hairy chest and sang sweetly. Ideal. Sleeping next to her was me, or rather, my other self, my twin brother. He hadn't even covered himself with a blanket, exposing his junk. I went back to the kitchen and opened the champagne, then went back into the bedroom and started pouring the sweetness of the privates. Betty woke up, and when she saw me, she rolled off the bed, scooting into the corner. Christopher, don't, I'm begging you. She didn't scream, she squealed. I'm breaking into a falsetto. Stephen, seeing me, smirked and without covering himself, got up and stretched. You're early. I grabbed his throat with one hand. I just had to squeeze his fingers, and that was it. You gonna kill me? My brother had a cocky smile on his face. She's been my woman for a long time. I'm just taking what's mine. I shifted my gaze to Betty. My wife grabbed her knees and went into a sobbing fit. I'm sorry. Like an incantation, she repeated. I only love you. I wish I knew what such love was called. Then it hit me. You've been together a long time. I looked at Betty enough to give birth to a son for her, Stephen answered. I felt like I'd been hit over the head with a sledgehammer by a son. Daima, isn't that my son? I suddenly began to choke. Everyone knows that but you. Stephen laughed. Let me go. He threw my arm away. My punch to the jaw lifted his body off the floor. Stephen flew across the wide bed and collapsed, hitting his head on the wall. Only his bare feet were sticking out of the bed. Betty was already calling someone on his cell phone from his corner. Get over here as soon as you can. Christopher's here. My first instinct was to get out of here as fast as I could. I couldn't be in the same room with these assholes, with a wife who'd been having an affair behind my back for nearly 5 years, and Stephen the bastard. I couldn't call him a brother. I didn't want to get into the philosophy of family relationships. I just had itchy fists. I even became afraid that I would just kill her first, and then this thing that had taken over the body of my favorite woman. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of vodka, which was in the refrigerator. I was going to drink it, but stopped and put the glass on the table. One should drink with joy, not with grief. Something told me I needed to stay sober, and this wouldn't be the last time. On this day, I was right. The front door slammed, and my parents came panting into the apartment. I sat in the kitchen and looked out the window, gathering what little strength I had left to calm myself down. My father came into the kitchen. Where's Stephen? What did you do to him? I expected all sorts of things, but not this kind of concern. Sebastian, Stephen is here. Mother's voice came from the bedroom. My father rushed into the bedroom, and there was a commotion. Apparently, they were bringing my wife's lover to his senses. I shook myself out of everything. I didn't care what happened next. I saw no sympathy for my father. only concerned for the fate of his favorite son. He and my mother knew everything. Knowing full well about the bastard's connection to my wife, they knew about my son, knew and kept quiet, or worse, knew and supported him. I felt so disgusted I wanted to vomit. My machine began to calculate my next steps. The fact that my marriage was over was clear. The job was over too. I couldn't see that thing that used to be my brother every day. I had to move out of my apartment. It's a mess. Aside from my car, Betty quietly slipped into the kitchen. "Christopher, it's your brother." I couldn't resist. "You two look exactly alike." "Dimka, you're not a stranger's nephew either. You won't leave us." "Christopher, don't be silent." Betty grabbed my legs. "Do you want to beat me?" "Not at my place." I was so squeamish I got up and went to the window. The sun had already risen, and its rays were bouncing off my wind-up car parked right under the window. I was finally able to pull myself together. The true reasons for my long business trips became clear. While I was away from home, at the business of the firm only had a break with my wife. My parents came into the kitchen. "Christopher, don't make a tragedy out of what happened. We're one family, and we have to stick together. Dad started it. Don't make any rash decisions. I've already made my decision. I just have one question. You knew about everything. You knew the son wasn't mine." I spoke calmly, even casually. Not a muscle in my face quivered. The father was silent. Mother cried quietly. Everything was clear. "It's Stephen, my favorite son. How could you deprive him of another toy?" "But Betty, why did she fall in love with me for money? Or did she fall in love so passionately that she decided to have another man's baby? Or just a woman's stupidity?" I silently headed out into the hallway. My father tried to block my way. "You're not going anywhere." He grabbed my sleeve. "Take your hand away." He sensed something in my voice and quickly removed his hand. "I'm leaving. Don't try to contact me. You don't have a second son. I never had one. I'm filing for divorce today." I looked at Betty and the paternity suit. "Dimka has his own father. Let him raise him. He's your son. He loves you. You're not gonna leave him and me. I won't give you a divorce." Betty was hysterical. Dad slapped me on the cheek with the palm of his hand. "What are you talking about? Come to your senses. This is your wife and son." I grabbed him by the chest. The mother screamed. "Christopher, don't you dare. That's your father. If you touch me again, I'll beat you to it, you old bastard." I pushed my father away from my mother, grabbed my unopened bag, walked past the smirking Catholic standing in the bedroom doorway, and out onto the landing. "Christopher, don't go." Betty's hysterical scream was the last thing I heard before the door slammed shut. I was choking with rage. I stared blankly in front of me for a while. Then I started the engine and drove along the white lime-painted curb. Before my eyes stood a smirk, Stephen's whole face. With what pleasure I would have smeared his insolent face against the wall. But was it worth going to jail for? I guess not. I ended up alone with no wife, no son, no family, no job, and no place to live. Renewed, so to speak. What's up? I've got to find a place to live. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the familiar number on the other end. It was answered very quickly. "Hello, it's the Elephant." I was driving the car with one hand and holding my cell phone in the other. "It's Christopher. I've got a minute." "Hello, Crank." To my army buddy, I was still Shatmanov. He was reluctant to call me by my first name. His habit used to annoy me a little. But now it's warmed my heart. I'm going to have to stay somewhere for a while again. I haven't decided whether to tell my friend about my troubles or not. I'm in trouble. I don't have a place to live yet. I see. The Elephant caught my thoughts on the fly. "Why don't you come to my place?" "There's a place here." Half an hour later, we were drinking fragrant tea in the kitchen. I categorically refused the offered food. After what I had been through, I couldn't eat a bite. My cell phone cried. Betty's name appeared on the screen. I disconnected the call. I had a fight with my wife. They'd poured me some hot tea. He asked with a wry grin. "It's much worse than that," I replied with a sigh. "Much worse." The elephant fell silent, understandingly. He knew what worse meant. "Are you ready? We can go right now." My friend looked at the clock here, not far away in the private sector. Half an hour away. I didn't speed behind the elephant's car. In fact, we hit a dirt road. And after 20 minutes, we pulled up to a small house standing in the back of a neglected lot. "It's an inheritance from my grandmother," the elephant explained. "I don't know what to do with it. I'm sorry to sell it, and I don't have time to work on it. So far, I've set up a man's den here." "Come in, elephant." He opened the lock on the gate and let me through, and a path barely visible in the grass led to the house. "Well, look." The elephant opened the door hospitably. "Live as long as you want." He approached the cast iron one standing almost in the middle. There is wood, and the stove heats up very quickly, a couple of piles. And it's Tashkent here. You can walk around in your underwear. It's not cold yet. The elephant opened the damper and looked inside the cast iron fireplace. "Anyway, I have to go to work. And you get settled. If anything, call me." He went out, and after a while, I heard the sound of a car pulling away. I went to get my bag, took out my jeans and t-shirt, hung them on the back of a chair. Let them hang them. They didn't fit in the bag. I looked around curiously. Inside the house was clean and cozy. The cabin itself was made of basic logs, and there was a persistent aroma of Smolensk pine in the room. The walls were not stapled, but simply chicken scrubbed and covered with colorless varnish. This gave them a noble matte shade. The ceiling was uncomplicatedly stapled, meticulously worked planks. All the wooden parts were made on conscience. It was evident that the cabin was built capitally and for a long time. The few pieces of furniture were old and almost antique. A folding sofa covered with a motley oriental rug stood against a blank wall. By the window itself was roughly boarded up from throws and boards. The table in the corner hummed old. I remember another Khrushchev refrigerator, a Dnieper. At the opposite wall stood a dam and a cabinet from the times of the cult of personality. On the floor was a thick pallet, obviously handmade. On the thin carpet above the sofa hung several hunting knives, without sheaths, and an old rifle without a bolt, giving the whole place a hunter's charm. The sleepless night was taking its toll. I turned off my phone. Inundated with calls and texts from Betty, I covered myself with a blanket and fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, it was almost dark. I tried to remember the slipped-away dream, but my brain refused to obey me. All that was left was the longing gnawing at my insides. I looked in the refrigerator. I see. It would be weird if there was anything in there. I pulled on jeans, a tank top, sneakers, and threw a camouflage jacket over my head, put on my favorite black baseball cap without a visor, locked the front door and headed for the car. It was already noticeably chilly. I closed the window and pressed the gas pedal. The car was rushing along the ring road. The torpedo slammed into the night air. I didn't know the neighborhood well and navigated by the glowing storefronts. The private sector was replaced by two-story barracks, built once for the workers of the furniture factory, some of which had lighted windows. At the end of the street, I saw the green window of a grocery store. I lurked with alcohol, took a couple of bottles of Dagestan brandy, 2 packs of dumplings, a couple of cans of dry potatoes, cucumbers, bread and some canned fish, and 2 dozen eggs. It seems to be enough for the first time. But how long would it last? This first time, I had no idea. At the checkout, I held out my card sleepily. The burly aunt swiped it several times on the terminal and looked at me disappointedly. "Access to the card is blocked," in a strained voice, she said. "Don't worry, I'll pay in cash." I held out the money, picked up the bags, and walked to the car. It made sense. Pops blocked my cards. What a bitch. I mean, it was my honestly earned money, my barely used paycheck. Good thing I cashed out almost half of it. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. Shit, I turned it off when the screen lit up again. A barrage of messages and missed calls rained down on me. Without reading, I deleted the garbage and drove home. To turn around, I had to drive to the end of the alley to the intersection. I had already turned left when my attention was caught by a commotion near the archway leading into the courtyard of a two-story barracks. Against the wall of the house, 6 in a pile, stood a few stripped, frustrated girls and watched tensely as 2 guys methodically beat their nearly stripped colleague. One of them was holding the unfortunate prostitute by the hair, winding it around his arm for convenience. I rolled down the right window. The execution took place in silence. The guys were engaged in their usual business, bringing up their ward. The girl did not resist and obediently bore rather strong blows. She only moaned pitifully. She did not even try to escape from her tormentors. It's understandable. Occupational hazard. Pimps educate the contingent to interfere. The girl was no longer on her feet and collapsed under the lantern. For a moment, her bloody face was in the light. Her producers did not stop beating her. Only instead of using their fists, they started kicking. The victim was no longer moaning, but wheezing. Her face looked familiar. That's right. That's my nocturnal knocker. An associate, in fact. And scouts don't leave their own behind. I jumped out of the car with a baseball bat. "Hey, stop hitting her," I shouted, rapidly approaching the place of execution. One of the managers turned around, showing me his face. This is what I was waiting for. The impact crunch and thud of a fallen body. The second character reacted instantly and rushed into the back alley. But my rage was looking for an outlet, and I caught up with him in 2 jumps and hit him on the spine with the bat. The pimp collapsed under the leather. Such a blow makes the legs fail. The fallen man lay on the asphalt, drooling bloody drool and with taut lower limbs. I looked around. No help was needed. I carefully picked up the lying maiden and gently placed her on my shoulder, carried her, and put her in the car. She only looked at me with eyes frozen in a mute scream and moaned quietly. I turned around and drove home, avoiding the potholes. Kathy was lying on the couch, and I cut off her rags with a knife. When I saw the naked body, I shuddered involuntarily. There was one big bruise on her stomach. Her legs are bruised, and there are cuts on the inside of her thighs and epoch marks from extinguished cigarettes. His face is broken and swollen. What kind of brute would you have to be to abuse a woman like that? I gingerly felt her limbs and ribs. The girl was moaning normally. Looks like the bones are intact. But I'd already realized I couldn't do it. We can't take her to the hospital. Lapila. She'll call the police right away. I dialed the elephant's number. Half an hour later, he arrived with a bearded man. Sam. A doctor. He introduced himself. Where's the body? That's his humor. The doctor gave her an anesthetic shot. Peroxide washed her wounds, bandaged her up. She's lucky. Her bones are intact, but she's in bad shape. This is a knife. He handed me a red packet. Give me 2 pills every 600 hours. Don't worry, your friend will pull through. I shook his hand and looked questioningly at the elephant. A molder. He caught my eye. I don't need anything. Robert has already paid me back. The elephant patted me on the shoulder, and he and the doctor left, and I moved the chair closer to the girl lying there and poured myself a glass of cognac. When I was a kid, I loved riding the railroad. I liked to look out the window, especially when the train was at the station. The station was always on the right as the train traveled, and on the left was the oncoming track. When a train was hitting it, it gave the impression that our train was moving and the oncoming train was standing. But once you looked to the right, the illusion of movement was gone. It reminded me of my family life. I kept looking to the left, mistaking the illusion of motion for truth. But in reality, my train was standing still, and in my so-called happiness, I never bothered to look to the right. It was only now that I began to realize that the situation was quite satisfactory and that she was losing face next to me on the pillow. One and the same. The rest was just a romantic adventure. The wife knew exactly what she was doing. She knew perfectly well that the baby would look like me anyway, so she gave herself to my brother with enthusiasm, with all her body and soul. At the same time, piously believing in family values, diligently imitating with me numerous orgasms, so that I did not suspect anything. My parents knew everything from the beginning. They were quite happy with the situation. Grandson, in any case, they're all the more from their favorite son of the hair, and I would be quite content with scraps from the bar's table. From the point of view of my parents and Betty, nothing egregious happened. A little embarrassment the horny husband found out, but he'll get over it and return to the family. We just have to wait. And they waited, blocking all my payment cards, thus leaving me without money, regularly sending a message and calling Betty. The content was familiar. I love you, I'm sorry, we'll have another son of yours. Then her mother joined her. It was trying to shame and push pity. It was hard to manipulate me. I cut them out of my life completely, cut off all ties. If they all, including not my son, fell through the ground, I would just shrug my shoulders and breathe a sigh of relief at being rid of those things. I didn't hesitate to file for divorce. Along with the paternity suit, the court ordered a genetic evaluation. No matter how much my family protested, calling me paranoid and scum. Bottom line, I'm not the father. You should have seen their disappointed faces. I wonder what they were hoping for. Then there was the trial. It was November and the frost was gripping my cheeks. We arrived at the hearing with an elephant. He had been patronizing me lately, trying to always be there for me. All these judicial adventures have simply got to me. The judge listened attentively to all the streams of lies and dirt that my former relatives diligently poured on me. When Stephen was given the floor, she perked up. A semblance of a smile appeared on her face. She kept shifting her gaze from him to me. The family's lawyer was jumping out of his pants in his closing argument, blaming me for everything that had happened. Then I was given the floor. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't want anything from them. I left everything. The former apartment, the car, left my father's company, and did not claim the inheritance. I didn't know my grandfather's position. He was abroad all this time and did not seem to be interested in family problems. Finally, the judge announced the decision: divorce. No alimony for either son or wife. I am not the father. The judge also advised me to sue the father's company for severance pay from my earnings for the last month of employment. At this, she gave a very expressive look to my father, who even folded under her gaze. Hammer blow. And the elephant and I headed out. My car was parked in a parking lot about 500 meters from the courthouse. On the way, the elephant ran to the store to buy some brandy to celebrate his freedom. I was taking my time walking to the car when I heard it over my ear. Satisfied bastard. A hard blow from behind knocked me off my feet, and I fell forward, barely able to put my hands in front of me. I didn't realize what had happened. The toe of a shoe slammed into my face. My eyes went black, and I fell on my back. Stephen was leaning over me. "Next time I'll kill you." He almost screamed as my father ran to pull him away from me, but my ex-brother managed to kick me in the side with his shoe. Betty came running toward me screaming. She knelt down and tried to lift my head to stop the blood coming out of my nose. "Honey, are you hurt?" I almost threw up at those words, and I quickly pulled myself together. It took me a second to get to my feet. I pushed away Betty, who had become a stranger, and turned to your brother out of the corner of my eye. I saw an elephant running across the street toward me. There was a crowd around us. Yeah, a lot of people were taking pictures on their phones. Stephen broke free from my father's grasp and lunged at me. That was his mistake. I met him with the back of my hand to his forehead. He froze for a moment, then collapsed like a Leatherman at my feet. I didn't finish him off. Somebody in the crowd clapped. A police car pulled onto the lawn. They're right on time, as always. I'm on my way to the station in handcuffs. Stephen came to his senses and filed a report against me for brutal, gratuitous beating. All the family, except Betty and my ex-mother, confirmed it. But then the elephant appeared on the scene with the cell phone footage. Everything fell into place. I was swayed and offered to file a report on Stephen. But I spit under my feet and, accompanied by the elephant, went out. How did the tour of the station end for my ex-family? I don't know. The only thing I remember was my mother crying, frozen with terror in her eyes. Was she starting to get it? Toward midnight, the cold began to make itself felt. It brazenly crept under the plate, or the hall of my bare heels with a cold tongue. I looked at the couch. The girl was sleeping quietly in a dream. I carefully adjusted the blanket, crawled down. Went outside. The full moon brightly illuminated the yard, then green color. I threw a few small ones on the curve of my arm. Polish Shuck added a couple of cracklings for the stack and went back into the cabin. A few minutes later, the stove hummed, nodding burning wood and filling the room with the smell of smoke. It immediately became cozy and warmer. I took cognac out of the refrigerator and poured myself another half glass. Immediately, I wanted to sleep. I sat down in an armchair and detached myself from the reality of where I was. I was awakened by Kathy's loud cry. "Don't worry, you're at a friend's house." I tried my best to calm the girl down. She flinched at my voice and tried to tuck her legs in. I guess she involuntarily caused the pain because she moaned loudly. She looked at me and tried to remember where she knew me from. "I gave you a ride into town last night. My name is Christopher. I met you. Remember, I spoke softly so I wouldn't scare her," and where she was afraid to phrase her question. "Your friends, they're gone and hopefully never will be again. You need to lie down for a while, and then you can leave if you want to." I handed her a leg. "Take a pill." Kathy looked at me. She looked like she was expecting another one of life's tricks, now in my face. "How did I get here?" "I brought you here. I'm kind of in charge of you now. Don't worry, just accept it. It's hard for me to explain the obvious to you." I smiled. "You hungry?" I put a skillet on the stove, and soon the room smelled of food. Kathy ate quickly, as if she was afraid I would take it away from her. I made tea from the elephant's supply, and having judged it beforehand, handed the cup to the girl. Then I helped her to the bathroom and made her comfortable on the couch again, covered her with a blanket. Soon she fell asleep. In the evening, the elephant came and dropped off the groceries, reported the situation. "No one is quiet in the city." I ran it through the guys. "No one is looking for her." He nodded at the sleeping Kathy. A week later, Kathy started getting up, and after another 5 days, hiding her eyes, she asked if I could leave. "Sure. No one's keeping you. Can you go right now?" I turned away and continued peeling potatoes. I had a craving for fried potatoes, so I'll cook for myself and the elephant. I didn't care if the girl stayed or not. I'd say her leaving took away a lot of problems, so good riddance. Kathy stood in the middle of the room, covered with a sheet and holding the remains of her dress. I rummaged through my bag and pulled out my tracksuit. "Take it." "Day, can you take my jacket?" "Wait." I rummaged through my closet. On the bottom shelf were some old women's shoes. "Maybe they'll fit." I put them in my clothes, and immediately I looked like a retired warrant officer. "Do you want me to drive you or call a cab?" "Better a cab." And ours waved. "Thank you." The cab came quickly. I didn't go to see Kathy off. She's not a little girl. It's hard to get a man out of shit, especially if they don't want to. Prostitutes come in many ways, not always forced. It's not my problem to raise her. You helped me out. You can't save everyone from here on out. A week after the divorce, my cards came back on. I got my last month's pay and severance pay. I was having more fun, but it couldn't last. I had to find a job at my father's company. The way was closed to me, as well as to other production facilities in our city. I tried several times to inquire about a job, but as soon as I heard my name, the personnel officers fell into a stupor and shut up, making it clear that the conversation was over. Only one manager of a small factory, smiling affectionately, advised to turn to Dr. Sebastian. I mean my father. and with him to solve the problem of employment. Anyway, my ex-family had me in a tight squeeze. In the end, the elephant managed to get me a job at a small car repair shop on a small salary. Its owner was too low-flying and didn't fall within the circle of interest of my ex-brother and his daddy. I didn't make any plans yet and was going to spend the winter at the elephant's house, and in the spring I was going to go to the east of the country in search of work. One late afternoon there was a timid knock at the door. I looked at the wall clock. The first hour was a little late. Outside the door was her life from the cold. "Kathy, may I come in?" "Come in." I shivered. The girl held a bag and was wearing my camouflage jacket. She walked to the stove and held out her aged palms. "How's business? How's business?" I said ironically. "I'd like some tea." I handed her an aluminum mug, fresh over emergency almost black tea. Kathy drank the tea, trying not to look in my direction. There was a pause. "Christopher, I might as well stay." She sighed heavily. "What's wrong? You have a room, don't you?" I put a candy bar in front of the guests and moved a stool. "A neighbor has taken the room as a coffee table. He'll give it back if I get into bed with him. He says I'm not worthless. I've been living with a friend all this time. She's getting married, so she kicked me out." The girl looked at the fire in the stove. "I have nowhere to go. The only thing left for me to do is to throw myself in the noose." Tears came out of her eyes. "So you're talking about the rope?" I grinned. She looked at me with a look that made me choke on my laughter. It was clear. "You can stay. Except I have one room and a couch." "One? You're against the wall. I'm on the edge. I'm spreading my arms. We'll figure something out later." In the morning, the elephant arrived. He wasn't surprised to see Kathy. "Let's go and talk." He went out to the yard first. "There's a job, but it pays well. It's a long way to Siberia. Today we have to meet the customer." Preliminarily, I was told that the work will be on the Army specialty. The elephant shook his lips. "A hot spot, huh? Dealing with corrupt politicians." I was disappointed. "It looks like something else. We'll see on the spot." The elephant grinned. "We can always say no. Where do we meet? At the Troika restaurant. They'll come to us." The elephant went to the car. "Get in. Let's go." I went back for my jacket. I nodded to Kathy and followed the elephant. In a restaurant with a dubious reputation. There weren't many people at this time. A couple of people at the window were getting healthy. And me and the elephant. After a while, a man came to our table and, without asking permission, sat down across from us. His whole appearance emphasized solidity, and at the same time he resembled a cobra preparing a goose for a throw. Ex-military, a special forces man, perhaps. Invisible vibes of danger mixed with the scent of expensive perfume. Fog, sharks, or our table completed the image. Stylish gray suit with a small checkered pattern, worn over a blue shirt with no tie. An insanely expensive Swiss watch and a platinum ring. On the ring finger of his left hand, exactly the kind of ring a confident man should wear, a successful man. "My name is Robert," he began without preamble. "I take it this is the man you were talking about." The elephant nodded. "Let's get right to the point. Do you know who I represent? The master is getting married." At that, our interlocutor smiled and is about to retire, handing over his business to his daughter. He recalled her from London and began to familiarize her with the business. For this purpose, he sent her to eastern Siberia to the gold mines. Nellie flew safely to the place, settled in a hotel, and disappeared. She didn't contact him for a week. Naturally, the owner got worried. We managed to find out that Nellie was kidnapped by local scumbags, not for ransom, but mainly for sexual pleasures. He's holding her in the taiga at a ranch. We know the place. Robert ran his hand over his face as if to relieve fatigue. We need to get her back. We've got to clean everybody out first. You know what I mean. Unfortunately, we don't have specialists of your caliber. Is that why I'm here? What's the price? The elephant has spoken. $5,000 each now and 10 after the issue is resolved. 20. And you can do whatever you want with us. In the words of a movie character, the elephant replied, "Agreed." The man nodded. "When do we leave?" Elephant took a sip of coffee that had already cooled down. "Yesterday, do not take anything with you. You will get everything on the spot. You'll be met and given a guide. Here's the money." Robert looked at me too closely and pushed 2 envelopes in our direction. "A car will pick you up in 2 o'clock." He stood up and, without saying goodbye, headed for the exit. He was quickly followed by 2 drunkards sitting by the window. "We're going away for a while. You'll stay in charge." Kathy shuddered. "Do you drive a car?" She nodded. I put the keys on the stool. "Take mine. They're gonna ask about us. If they do, you don't know anything. They just disappeared, that's all." I instructed my apartment. "I'll leave you the money." I put 1,000 Baku rubles next to the keys. "That'll be enough until we get back. But I have to go." I picked up my bag and headed for the door. "Christopher, wait." The girl came right up to me. "You just come back. You hear? Please come back." She threw her arms around me and snuggled into me for a second. I could taste the kiss on her lips. In her eyes, I could see more than just the sadness of parting. It all happened very quickly. I came to my senses when she made me see her off like that for the first time in my life. We got there without adventure. From the airport, we were taken to a local club. Misleadingly referred to as a hotel, we dropped our bags and went for shells. Robert wasn't lying. We were picked up winter camouflage, white robes, wide taiga skis. We took 2 Kalashnikov assault rifles with a silencer, a Stetkin pistol, a couple of tactical backpacks, complete with an unloader, winter boots, gloves. In general, everything that could come in handy in the taiga. In violation of the instructions, I even managed to run through the local market from Samalki. I bought an antique stiletto for a ridiculous amount of money. In disgraced camouflage torn jeans, a perfect weapon in close combat. What brings him to this neck of the woods? Hard to imagine. We managed to sleep for 3 hours. How? A protective colored UAZ truck came to pick us up. We drove about 160 kilometers. Then we turned onto a country road. After 30 kilometers, the car stopped on its own. The driver helped us take things out of the trunk, turned the UAZ and left the taiga on skis. A man in a warm jacket with a rifle over his shoulder came out. "This man, your guide." He introduced himself. I nodded. The elephant and I jumped around a bit. Our shell made no noise. We skied and followed each other with the guide away from the road into the thicket. The night was frosty. Already habitually fastened skis, we trampled a track along the snowfield in the taiga. There was a ringing silence. It was as if she was asleep. It was covered with icicles and hoarfrost. In the clear night sky hung a full green-blue moon, illuminating the forest. So clearly each tree stood out, and the number of stars was innumerable. You could pick needles. We had been walking for many hours through these wild places, carefully avoiding the trampled paths of hunters. If my heart were calmer, I could blissfully admire the beauty of the night. But my knees were dying from fatigue, and sticky, salty sweat was pouring down my face. I took a gulp of saliva, fixed my backpack, pulled the belt of my automatic rifle, and continued on my way, trying not to lose the back of the guide in the darkness. Gathering on the road, the elephant and I took with us only the essentials, some dry rations, matches, and a few horns with ammunition. On my belt, I had a tactical knife stiletto, bought recently at the flea market. I strapped it to my right hip. Its camouflage, torn sheath blended in with the color of my pants. It was almost impossible to see it there. It's a great thing for people who understand. We're supposed to reach our target just before dawn. Well, calculations are calculations, and we had to walk by panic of my wife, snow-covered virgin, and fatigue by the middle of the night had already piled up a lot. And at dawn, there is still the main work to be done. Having thrown us in these hours to stop is impossible. We got into the rhythm of movement, and any stop could throw off the breath and relax. It's a pleasure to stomp through the taiga at night. God forbid you move your leg or break anything. You can't get out of the taiga by yourself. How many people died like that, went into the taiga and never came back? I rhythmically moved my feet, helping myself with sticks, trying to breathe in time with the movement. The terrain was mostly flat, though a few times I had to roll down some low slides. But that was all right. We should be there soon. And by my calculations, it wasn't far now. Suddenly, I felt someone's unkind gaze on me. I even flinched. He's not slowing down. I looked around. No one. Was it just me? Unused to trusting my senses, or should I say instinct? That animal, subconscious sense of impending danger. It's never failed me in war or in everyday life. So there is something or someone here. I turned around. The elephant was methodically swinging his ski poles and following me along the trampled track. I wondered what I had imagined. Maybe it was a rogue bear. I didn't want it on my head. I switched to light running, trying to keep a close eye on the road and the sides, just in case I took the safety off the automatic rifle. The cartridge was in the cartridge, so in case of what there is something to meet. Suddenly, the guide stopped and raised his hand. I cautiously drove up and stopped beside him. "There is someone here," the alien hunter said quietly. "He's watching us. Should we attack or something?" I was breathing hard. I was tired of civilian life. I don't know. If he wanted to, he would have attacked us long ago. I smelled him 200 hours ago. He's coming from our right about 100 meters away. I cautiously looked in that direction, but I didn't see anything. I looked back and looked at the elephant crouching with the machine gun. "What are we going to do?" quietly asked the guide. "Do the job." I looked expressively at the machine. "Let's go." It was time to show the hut, but there was a forest all around, and there was no sign of habitation. Suddenly, it seemed to me that the frightened guide had lost his way, but he stopped and waved to me. "It's gonna be the edge. We're at the target. You're on your own from here. You got a map. You'll reach the point on your own." The guide turned his skis around. "Good luck. Aren't you afraid?" "Alone. I've been in the taiga since I was a kid." The man shrugged his shoulders and, without looking back, walked along the trampled track in the opposite direction. Soon his back, illuminating mine with moonlight, disappeared behind the trees. In about an hour it should be dawn, but the moon seemed to shine even brighter. For our expedition, such weather is worse than the worst enemy. I'd rather have fog and snow, but such was our luck. "The elephant has arrived." "Well, Commander, we start quietly," he said and adjusted the belt of the machine gun. We slid toward the lodge, hiding in the shadows of the trees, trying to keep Luna to our left so that our shadows merged with the solid wall of the forest. At last I saw at the opposite edge of the clearing Dalevskaya in the moonlight a long structure enclosed by a fence of reflex sheets-based iron. The two windows facing the edge of the forest, where the elephant and I lurked, were dark. Almost closely adjoining the house was a barn made of logs, and farther away in a special area, barely covered with snow, was dark. The historical monster of thunder was a helicopter, sabers, blades. On the side opposite the house, there were several tanks, probably with fuel for the helicopter. Somewhere nearby an engine clattered, generating electricity. At the entrance to the lodge it dimmed. An uneven blue-colored flashlight came running. I pulled my night binoculars out of my unloading and brought them up to my eyes. There didn't seem to be any dogs. We started off as if we were on a roll. I felt a familiar shiver run down my spine. The feeling of the last seconds before the attack, when it is impossible to stop, as it is impossible to stop a snow avalanche that has begun its movement. Without turning his head, he waved his hand, and in perfect silence, the figure in a white coat zigzagged towards the fence. In a few seconds, the elephant was already on the other side and took up a position at the side wall, holding the entrance in his sights. I overcame the obstacles in one leap and stood close to the door, put my palm on the handle, and gently pulled the door towards me. It moved towards me and stopped, as if it was bumped into something. I see, with the usual hook, holding the automatic behind my left hand with my right. I pulled out a knife and slipped the blade into the slot. Lightly pressed upward, pulled at the door toward me, and slowly lowered the hook so it wouldn't yank open. Carefully, he opened the door. Silence from the cabin smelled of lodging, onions, stew, gun grease. Behind me, an elephant crept through the doorway. Just in case of fear and me on tiptoe, I slipped inside, moving quickly and silently, putting soul by soul, judging by the life-affirming ramp up to the wearer. Nausea from behind a closed door leading to a side room. 2 natives were sound asleep. I slid like a shadow along the wall without taking my finger off the trigger. Where is the third? And the prisoner? As if answering my mute question from behind the other door, I heard a characteristic slapping and a loud, prolonged groan. I gently pushed the door open and peered through the crack. A big male was grooming a woman on all fours. Well done. With such fervor that she occasionally hit her head on the headboard of the bed. Good thing there was a mat hanging there. Softened the blows I could clearly see in the darkness, rhythmically moving white in the ass of the man. There was an example of the most tender intergender friendship inherent in a partner who understood each other well. It didn't look like the damsel from To Her Beau. Not willingly, I let him live for a second, and then I pulled out, stellet, and put it to the hilt between the ribs, right in the heart through my body. Like a discharge of electric current ran inexpressible sensation, transmitting itself to the enemy along with the impact of the knife. The moment when the man you killed leaves the life, and it's as if you see his flying soul. I felt like an angel of death for a moment. The male silently fell face down on the maiden. She had already opened her mouth to scream, but I had time to put my glove in it. The maiden fell silent, spinning her eyes frantically. Behind my back, the elephant's automaton clicked softly twice. For a moment about the light in the corridor, not bright flashes. 2 bodies returned to the beds and froze, convulsing, clearly emphasizing the feet in a fading rhythm. Illuminated by the full moon, the Tega froze in a light stupor in the silvery moonlight. Dimly cast white coats, tall pines. I pressed the 2 tangent 3 times. The radio station quietly took a chance. The signal was received. Half an hour later, I heard the approaching rumble of a helicopter. The elephant had pulled onto the porch, a bound maiden. She was lunging, trying to say something and trying with all her might to spit out my glove sticking out of her mouth. Maybe he'll untie her, the hardy elephant said doubtfully. So that she bites us no more, or what? We'll turn her in, Daddy. Let her deal with it. We've done our job. I and the elephant picked up the girl under the arms and dragged to what helicopter. The pilot keeps the engine running, and the propeller blades revolved, raising a blizzard of snow. Take it, I shouted to the chief of security, standing on the top step of the gangway. He stretched out his hand and pulled the girl inside the car. I put the machine gun behind my back and started to climb up the ramp. Robert shouted something from behind my back, and a shot rang out very loudly. I was hit in the shoulders with a sledgehammer, and the light went out. Consciousness came back in pieces. First I felt my legs, then my arms, then a piercing cold. When I lifted my eyelids, a blinding white light, bright and sharp as an awl, struck my eyes. I blinked a few times. I could see nothing. Recent events pulled out of memory: Zanka girl, a helicopter, and a shot in the back, something behind the rustle and the side. Are you awake? The elephant had no choice of words as usual. What was that? I spoke slowly. I wasn't fully awake yet. It was a cleanup job. First us, and then us. The elephant spit. Honestly, I don't understand it myself. Who did the shooting? There's one thing that's been bothering me so far. Yeah, our guide was buried in a snowdrift, waiting for a command. He hit your backpack, and there's a titanium plate in there. If you need anything. Elephant wiped his face with the palm of his hand. You got thrown off the ramp, and you're like this. While he was shooting at you, I cut him off with my machine gun. Too bad. I missed the bastard large enough. He managed to run over the door. The elephant smiled, but I'll get him too. I lay there, afraid to move. The pain in my back throbbed and jolted by the metal butt of the machine gun. It pressed painfully on my ribs. The assault rifle ended up under my stomach. Slowly, the ability to think returned. True, there were not much thoughts in my head. Everything was clear. We were screwed. And it had been planned from the beginning. But now the main question in my mind was how to get out of here. How long had I been unconscious? I turned on my side and tried to pull out the machine gun for about half an hour. The elephant tried to help me, and the chopper flew right away. Almost immediately made a circle and went northeast. Right. Flew to Hutton. I finally got my gun out. We gotta get out of here as fast as we can. As if they heard my words in the distance, a wolf howl, long and dreary. The forest sanitation workers are coming, the elephant snorted. I did not share his amusement. Nonsense. If anything, I've stayed at the camp. The walls are strong there. The elephant said cheerfully. I don't think so. They'll come back, especially since they know you're alive. Why do they need witnesses? I was going for the worst-case scenario. Out of the woods, there was the growing rumble of a helicopter engine. Above the tops of the pine trees, the wing propeller and the machine appeared. The helicopter swept over the clearing and went for a second circle. In white coats, we were invisible from above, and it inspired hope. The helicopter showed itself again, and I saw a rocket break off from its console and rush downward, leaving a blue trail behind it. It hit right in the middle of the cabin. There was a burst of flame, and then an explosion. We were covered in heat and hit by a blast wave. As if on cue, we dropped our heads into the snow as we came to our senses. The rumble of the helicopter came from far away. Well, everything was finally cleaned up. I looked toward the cabin. The cabin was burning. Clouds of blue smoke were rising above the taiga. A little later, the fuel tanks burst. Those bitches. The elephant cursed. Yes, they were competently. All the more reason to do so. After waiting about 10 minutes and making sure the helicopter was finally gone, I got to my feet. I shook myself out of a decent amount of snow. Get up. Let's see if there's anything left. I hung the automatic rifle on my chest and headed towards the bush. Slightly afraid, putting the machine gun in front of me, I walked towards the huge campfire. Ahead still heavy. Forest, trees, fears, howling. Snow dust was pulled by the sharp smell of burning. Inflamed wood resin, rubber, something else rather synthetic. Ahead of them lay a few dead trees. The heat of the fire hit me in the face. At the sight of the winter house, a heap of burning logs, a rubble fence. I walked another 50 meters, gradually slowing my step. I couldn't get closer. I could not let the heat from the fire. The fire was still blazing in full force. I stopped next to it. The elephant was breathing heavily. The situation was changing like in a kaleidoscope of actions of our enemies. And these are definitely enemies impossible to guess. It would be good if they thought we were dead. But who can predict what the enemy is thinking? What do we do? The elephant, the life-loving one, has spoken. We have to go. I pulled out a map. The nearest village is 80 kilometers away. It'll take 2 days to ski across the virgin land. And we have water all around us. I pointed to the snow. But what about the wolves? Suddenly, I felt the prickly stare again. My heart treacherously fluttered. Again, we seemed to be being watched. I looked at the elephant. Don't you feel anything? My partner lifted his chin. As if there was something in the air uncertainly, he muttered. We need to find the skis. I turned my head. And suddenly I saw what I should have seen immediately. About 150 meters away from the fire, a small helicopter stood by the forest itself. Of course, it could have been destroyed by the explosion, but it's worth a try. It's a sin not to take such a chance, especially the only one. I turned to the elephant, but he was staring at something on the opposite side of the glade. Look, he said in a breathy voice. I put the binoculars to my eyes. At the very edge of the forest, without hiding, there stood a lone figure resembling a human, exactly resembling a pair of neck with black hair, moving on two legs. It walked slowly in our direction. Instead of a human head, she had the head of a bear on her shoulders, or something like that. The beast walked slowly toward us, as if it realized we had nowhere to go. A cold dread began to creep into my soul. My legs felt like absorbent cotton, and a foreign voice sounded in my head. There's nowhere to go. There was only death ahead. I looked at the elephant, who was silently staring at the approaching monster. Saliva was coming out of his half-open mouth. He's a degenerate. From this thought, I came to my senses, grabbed my partner by the collar of his jacket, and dragged him to the helicopter. The helicopter was intact. I saw it from a distance. What happened next was a poker game. Is there fuel in the tank? If so, how much? I kicked the elephant inside and climbed in myself. The elephant came to his senses and looked at me with a meaningful look. He said, "We need a silencer now," and pulled the bolt. Too bad the caliber is too small. Well, sorry, no grenade launcher. I've been tinkering with the dashboard. I've never seen a helicopter like this before, but all machines like this have the same controls. Give me the ignition key, and I'll need one. I took a quick look at the instruments, everything familiar. All in all, no surprises, some things I've never seen before. On this model I have not practiced, but all the improvements of the third degree, reading a prayer to myself, reached for the right ones. The toggle switch started the engine, the twin screws with the glowing gunpowder spinning at idle. Need to extend it at least a little. Looked at the fuel gauge. Looks like there's half a tank. Increased the revs, and the engine started howling and buckled up. I yelled to the elephant. At that moment, right in front of my face came a glowing face. It was a strange, incredible creature. Most of all, it looked like a monster from my nightmarish dreams. It resembled half bear, half monkey with a large head remotely resembling a bear's. It was covered from its huge, angular head to its heels, with gray-black fur that was not long, thick, and dense. At the open mouth, wetly knotted self and pianist saliva. Dense rows of even sharp-pointed fangs. In the short fur solidly cover the muzzle under the wary standing triangular ears. Burning with inhuman malice. Deep-set scarlet eyes with vertically set yellow badges. Its roar was audible even in the cockpit, despite the engine running. I lifted the car into the air. The helicopter pecked a few times. Nodes wobbled, but obediently gained altitude. I looked down. The creatures were raging there, having lost their prey. I raised the helicopter another 5 meters, added Gaza, and headed northwest towards the village of Razdolnoy. "And how long have you been flying helicopters?" Slan gave a voice. "You won't believe it, I'm flying for the first time." The man put his elbows on the table and looked attentively at his interlocutor. "I ask you again, Sebastian, where is Christopher?" Sebastian felt like he was being interrogated. He felt as if his father could see right through him. "Dad, I haven't seen him in a long time. Right after the divorce, he disappeared." "Disappeared? Did you go looking for him?" The owner of one of the largest steel companies in the country shook his head incredulously. Why did they divorce? Christopher, for some reason, decided that Stephen had slept with his wife. So he made a scandal of it. Sebastian looked uncertainly at his youngest son. For some reason, he decided out of the blue. John grinned, but his grin was cold. And then he got divorced and disappeared. There must be a good reason for a man to go to such drastic measures. I know my grandson. He doesn't make too hasty decisions. Grandfather grumbled. "John, you mustn't worry." The young woman standing behind the chair put a hand on the man's shoulder. Grandfather affectionately covered her palm with his, instantly drawing a disgruntled grimace from his son. "All right, it's all clear to me. Sit in the hallway." Grandfather turned to the young man frozen at the window and said, "Call my daughter-in-law." A still quite young woman entered the office. She walked uncertainly to the long desk. "Hello, Emily. Have a seat. Would you like some tea or coffee? Have you had any breakfast today?" The old man's eyes shone with love. It was clear that he loved his daughter-in-law and showed her no ostentatious respect. "Hello, Daddy." Emily looked warily at Emily's father-in-law. "What's wrong?" "While I was away." "Why did Christopher leave the family?" Emily cried. "He accused Betty of adultery and of having a son by another man." "Why did he think that?" Grandfather frowned. "He caught Betty's table in bed." Emily covered her face with her hands, beat up Stephen, and left. Beaten up by Stephen. Also fabulously lucky. I would have killed standing behind the chair. The woman soothingly stroked her grandfather's shoulder. "Where can Christopher be now?" "He was at the trial with his army friend. His name is Elephant, I think. Maybe he's at his place now." The old man hesitated. Camille ordered. He raised his head and looked at the young woman. "It will be done, John." She wrote something down in a notebook. "Emily." Grandpa smiled. "I'll take you to the restaurant for lunch and we'll talk." He got up from his chair, showing that the formal part was over. "In my time, I took everything from the Army service, even the ability to drive a helicopter. It may have been a little tricky, but it was the skill that saved our lives today." Down below was a solid, blurry green-white mass. The weather began to deteriorate from above. Sullen gray clouds loomed overhead. I made a slight turn, touched the wheel. The helicopter tilted. It seemed that the gray sky dropped lower, threatening to pin the car to the ground. I put on my headphones and turned on the onboard radio. Nothing could be heard in the headphones but a crackling noise. The helicopter shook. An air pocket. Heart froze for a moment. Fell into my stomach. Nearby, an elephant was swearing. A jolt began, but soon stopped. I estimated that we had already flown most of the distance to our target. I looked at the gauges. We were almost out of fuel. We'd have to land soon. I looked down. A sea of green pine needles. Ahead showed mountains shrouded in snow and horns on the slopes and trees. I took the car higher. The haze around me was thickening, but I had to climb up far beyond all the instruments. I knew how to use them. It wasn't about finesse. "You fly. You don't fall down, that's fine. I think I've had enough of climbing above the clouds." I switched back to horizontal flight. The helicopter shook. Squeezing the levers, I leveled the machine. We were on the same course. I was absorbed in maneuvering. Practically did not look at the instrument panel. I still didn't understand the position of some of the arrows of some instruments. The helicopter was flying over the green taiga again. A gray thread of the frozen wide Svur River with a compass flashed where white patches of birch trees broke through. I realized that I had not so much deviated from the intended course in 10 West no more. I wiped my face wet with sweat with the sleeve of my robe mask, and a red light on the dashboard was freezing, indicating that the fuel was left for 10 minutes. I began to descend, looking for a place to land. The taiga was a solid dark green carpet. Finally, I saw the white one about Galena. I made a circle and came in, started manipulating the levers again. The helicopter lay there. Every now and then it fell into weightlessness. Finally, the machine went down responsibly. The landing was not very soft. The helicopter perceptibly bumped the angry ground. The rotating blades raised around a small snowstorm. Finally, the engine shut down and there was silence. I pulled out the map and tried to determine our location to Razdolnoy. It was about 20 kilometers, but we had to walk them even without skis. We crawled out of the cabin and looked. The river was somewhere on the right, about 2 kilometers away from the village, so we decided to walk along the frozen bed. I fixed the strap of my backpack and stepped towards the river. Following me, holding the automatic rifle at the ready, moved Elephant after each other. We walked through unfamiliar terrain, vaguely realizing where we were going. Finally, we came to the shore. The time was already rolling towards evening, and to all appearances, it would soon begin to get dark. Winter days are short. We had to think about sleeping and look for a suitable place. but there was no suitable place. Suddenly, almost at the very shore, among the tall larches I saw a wooden hut. It was so black from time that at first I took it for a big boulder. We came closer. The hut had once been pancaked from thick larch trunks. It was certainly a winter hut. Only long abandoned from time, the hut was almost window to window in the snow. In some places the roof was damaged. The windows still kept their panes intact, but were boarded up. The door, oddly enough, was intact. I gingerly pulled the leather handle on the door toward me, clinging to the icing. The low threshold reluctantly crept open, exposing a dark doorway. Holding our weapons at the ready, we stepped into the darkness and stopped in confusion. Inside the hut was darkness. Our eyes fell out. Digging in my backpack, I took a flashlight and pressed the button and involuntarily took a step back. Right in front of us at arm's length, the flashlight illuminated a time-yellowed human skull, exposing rare crooked teeth from beneath a fur cap and a smile. Braids of long gray hair fell over his shoulders. It was clear that the inhabitant of the Zinmovie was long and reliably dead by the color of the flashlight. I watched the skeleton from all sides. Apparently, when alive it was a man on a garment of leather and dense fabric. Decorated with a long limp were sewn several figures in the form of fantastic beasts. In his right hand, the skeleton firmly held an ancient KP Strong gun with a long, living through the barrel. The left hand had fallen off and lay next to the skeleton, clutching with his fingers a small axe, similar to an Indian tomahawk. A homemade knife with a long rusty blade and a handle carved from bone was lying on the side. Beside the knife something gleamed, reflecting the light of the flashlight, a ring. It was very old and seemed to be made of silver. Not really looking at the find, I quickly put it in the breast pocket of my jacket. Without saying anything to the elephant, I walked around the skeleton and shone the flashlight, started to examine the room. On the left, near the wall, sheltered bunks, open with lice skins. Above them, hooked on a rusty nail, hung a tambourine with tied copper cubans. In the far corner was a stove built of wild stone. It looked to be in good working order. Near the stove lay a neatly stacked supply of dry wood. Near the window there was a table, boarded up from new boards. Everything was as it should be in a hut. I turned around and the elephant, not letting go of the automatic rifle, froze on the threshold. Obviously, he was not going to spend the night with this monster under one roof. Meanwhile, it was already getting dark. Gloomy clouds rolled the sky tightly. Spreading fine snow, I took out of my backpack a candle and a lighter, taked it to the table, lit it, and the room lit up with a bright light that gave it a semblance of coziness. Elephant took out of his backpack a piece of the presentation divided on the floor and neatly folded the remains. They took them out of the hut, intending to bury them in the morning. I built a fire in the stove. I estimated that there would be enough wood for the morning. I started laying things out one by one, taking them out of my backpack. The elephant opened with a knife and put cans of stew and porridge on the stove. Old nails were hammered into the wall of the hut. On them we hung jackets and weapons. The aroma of stew had already diffused through the room. Well familiar to all those who served in the army, I moved two roughly fabulous stools to the table. No plates. We'll have to eat directly from the cans. Carefully put the hot cans on the table and took out an aluminum spoon. At the same time, the elephant took out bread with a knife. I looked at him with a special look. A look only an old soldier can understand. May I? His eyes told me. I stuck my hand into my backpack, took out an army flask with alcohol, and rubbed the mug of flagla rotted and its edge. And soon the fiery water poured down his throat. Followed by me too, I applied myself to the drink of the gods, quickly chugging it down with key water from the other flaga. The elephant even stopped chewing, watching the process intently. Don't forget to exhale. The commander gallantly wiped off the regulars of the social parlors. My partner advised me. As Comrade Stalin said, life has become more cheerful. The elephant and I got more and began to get ready for bed. I paddled out of the hide and threw them outside on the bunk. Settled the staff, neck, jacket, putting my backpack under my head. The bed was ready. We decided to sleep by turns, dividing the night into watches. The night was restless. Several times I heard strange sounds outside. Every now and then there was a mumbling outside the windows, sometimes a wolf-like howl, accompanied by the banging of a tambourine. Anxiety grew rapidly in my chest. In the morning, slowly leave this place, this place is ruined. I did not wake up the elephant and sat up all night clutching my rifle. Toward morning, the strange sounds stopped. There was an ominous silence. It was still dark when I woke the elephant. We have to get out of here, I whispered, putting on my backpack. There was no time for explanations. I took my automatic rifle, taking the safety off. The elephant looked at me understandingly, without asking questions. We need to go down to the river and then follow the river. There is less snow there than on the bank, I whispered in the elephant's ear, as if I was afraid that someone would hear me. You go first. I'll cover everybody out. I pulled back the heavy bolt, opened the door and froze. Opposite the hut, with its back to the river, stood the blurred morning poem of the corners. A black cash register, a figure in front with empty eye sockets. In a bony fist clutched the handle of a knife with a bloody blade. A wave of animal fear swept through my entire body. Instinctively, I raised my automatic rifle and with a short burst slashed at the creepy creature. To my amazement, I saw that the shots had no effect. The bullets had hit the target. I saw it clearly, but the figure did not even sway. It continued to stand still and stare at us silently, as if I had fired blanks. Finally, the figure took a step back. Its outlines gradually began to blur, and soon it disappeared, as if it had vanished into thin air. For some time, we stood like a halt, afraid to move. Why are we standing there? I hissed, coming to my senses. Let's go. We moved down the path with a quick step. When I left this strange place, I had to find a way down to the river. I followed behind, looking carefully around. At some point, I began to think that we were not alone. Someone was following in our footsteps. I'm not a great tracker, but I noticed the bushes trembling, crackling, twigs behind us. Sometimes there was a blurred shadow among the trees. I had the impression that the pursuers were not particularly lurking. We were already dying in the frozen swamps. When a terrible howl sounded ahead, we were deliberately pressed close to the swamp. Cutting off escape routes, we switched to running, trying to break through to the river. I had already seen the cliff, when from somewhere on the side of the thorny shrubbery covered with snow, a gray shadow rushed at me. The sound, machine gun bursts, cut the silence. It did not reach me. A huge wolf leaped away. It was unclear if it had hit or not. A shadow flashed again. I fired without aiming. It squealed pitifully. At that moment, I saw something black and shaggy coming from my left. I held my breath. I fired again. The beast buried its head in the snow. There's the cliff. And that's when they came at me from behind. Yeah, I didn't see that coming. I could hear the beast's stinking breath on the back of my neck. The wolf tried to grab me by the neck with its teeth, but it was prevented by a thick fur collar. It was impossible to use a machine gun in this situation. I threw away the now useless weapon and tried to pull out my knife, frantically fumbling around my belt, but could not find the hilt. The teeth of the beast were inevitably approaching my neck, and that's when I remembered the stiletto. Wrenched it from its sheath on my hip and stabbed it back with all my might, from the bottom to the top. It hit us squarely between the ribs, and we collapsed to the ground. The wolf wheezed, his grip loosened, and I struggled to get out from under the carcass. He was still twitching for mushrooms, clawing at the snow. But it was clear he didn't have long to live. I feared another attack, so I did not hesitate to cut his throat. At that moment, an elephant ran up to me in a bush coat with a torn-off sleeve. But since he was breathing heavily, it looked like he had gotten it too. I picked up the automatic rifle and wiped it with my glove on the snow. A vague thought was going through my head, and then it came to me. Wolves. They're so smart. for an ordinary animal, and they were hunting us by the book. There was a barely audible rustle. A new character appeared in the clearing. Stepping out of the shadows of the trees, the red corners of its eyes glared at us. A huge wolf stared intently. The white light of the rising sun was building on his pelt, and it seemed as if the fur was cast with silver. My finger rested on the trigger, but the wolf didn't attack. He stood for a while longer, and then turned leisurely and seemed to disappear into the taiga. We were still standing with the elephant, breathing heavily, trying to collect ourselves after the fight, as a ringing dog barking was heard from the river. 3 surrounded Nart, mated with dogs, were passing us along the frozen river towards Razdolnoy. I raised my automatic rifle and fired several times into the air. By evening, we were in Razdolnoy. The next day, a hitchhiking timber truck delivered us with the elephant to the district center, from where we flew to the capital of the region in an old N2 called by the people as a corncob. Our native city met us with snowfall and cold wind. Despite the bad weather, everything around spoke about the imminent coming of the new year. Multicolored lights on artificial Christmas trees shone festively. Temptingly, new lights of advertisements were burning. People hurried to buy gifts for their relatives and food for the New Year's table. It is said that one should never leave the year unfinished. My elephant and I knew this tradition well and decided to find a customer for our Taiga Odyssey. We pushed the automata back to Razdolnoy. A local amateur bought them for a good price. With this money, we were able to buy tickets home. Everything else, including the knives, we managed to spend in our luggage. There was even enough for a cab from the airport to our temporary haven. I got there when it was already dark. The lot was snowed in, and there were no tracks to the house in sight. I ballooned over the door. The key was in place. Soon the stove was humming merrily. I made myself whatever dinner I could from what I found in the refrigerator and sat down in a chair opposite the stove. Kathy was gone. Judging by the fact that there weren't any of her things in the room, she'd been gone quite a while, probably right after we broke up. Was I upset? It was a little sad that nothing is permanent in my life. Sooner or later things leave me. So Kathy left too. I poured some vodka and pulled out a classic pickle from the bathhouse. Well, be well. Suddenly I remembered my find in the abandoned ranch. I took the trophy ring out of my jacket pocket and carefully placed it on my palm, trying to determine its weight. It was clearly a man's ring. In the old days, silver was always considered a masculine metal, unlike gold, a feminine metal. I turned on the table lamp and scrutinized the ring. It was a solid ring, no special frills. An equilateral cross in a circle, obviously without religious connotations. In the center of the cross is a convex circle, similar to the urban. Between the crossbars of the cross is poured in places by sections of time black and red enamel. In general, it all looked very much like a shield. Most likely, it was some symbol, the meaning of which I was not destined to understand. I moved the ring away from my eyes. It looks beautiful. Will I ever find out how this ring ended up in the hut? Who made it and to whom it belonged? I don't think it was the man whose remains we found. This ring doesn't match his supposed appearance. But who knows? Looks can be deceiving. I couldn't take my eyes off the ring like I was mesmerized. And somewhere inside me, I suddenly began to feel fear. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding under my throat. Fear surfaced from its hidden depths and clammy paws enveloped and bound my whole body. I shook my head, trying to pull myself together. And suddenly, as if obeying an unknown force, I put a ring on the ring finger of my right hand. Immediately it became hot. The heat on my hand went up to my shoulder and spread all over my body. Even more boredom and heart. I began to fall into a bottomless well. And after a moment, everything disappeared. I was sound asleep. I woke up to a knock on the front door. I looked at my watch. I turned my head. A strange man stood in the doorway and looked at me curiously. "Hello, Christopher." The man said hello politely. Yes, it's an unforgivable mistake. not locking the door behind you. Intelligence, my ass. Could have been a nighttime stabbing. Suddenly, I was relieved. They would have wanted to stab him. I wondered if it was from the customer or someone else. I looked around the room. There was nothing suitable at hand. If I threw myself at him with my bare hands, he'd shoot me in flight. The man seemed to read my mind. Christopher, you're in no danger. You don't need to kill or maim me. The man smiled. John wants to talk to you. He's been here for a long time. Did your grandfather come? Yes, for about a week now. Come on. Is he expecting you? The stranger continued to stand in the doorway, making no attempt to enter the room. At that moment, his cell phone began to cry in his pocket. The man put it to his ear and listened in silence for a few minutes, then handed it to me. It's for you, Christopher. I heard the familiar voice of my grandfather in the phone. Come right away. We need to talk. Now you know everything. Grandfather looked at me carefully, and his gaze penetrated into my very soul. He rose from his chair and poured me half a glass of bourbon. I think it's about time. He set the glass in front of me. I poured the whiskey into my mouth without even tasting it. What my grandfather had told me shook me to the core. I had never seen such filth in my life. My whole being protested against the truth, but not to trust the only person I had left close to me. I had no reason to. I've been surrounded by betrayal and lies for the last 5 years. How stupid do you have to be to ignore the obvious for so long? And there were clues. They were always there, but I didn't want to see them. Trying to hide in the world I invented, I remembered my wedding with a bride in a white dress with witnesses, all rank and file. Betty's surprise at my family's visit. The joy of the lavish gifts. It's too fake, too artificial. Betty knew about the apartment and the car. She knew in advance and skillfully played up the joy and surprise. First lie. Then it became a habit. My long and frequent business trips, her love affair with Stephen, and then my father. The family mix. And she seemed to enjoy it. A wife for everyone. Except for the baby. It was a mix-up, an unplanned pregnancy. Could have been from her twin brother. No DNA test can tell. Who's the father? No. I got pregnant by my ex-father's horny brute of a father. So the DNA test in court proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the child was not mine. And I was blindsided. I mean, it was clear it wasn't Stephen's either. Who knew, you ask? Everyone but me. And Mom knew everything. Nothing was hidden from her. She knew and kept quiet. She was afraid of her husband, or she disliked her own son so much. How can you love one and hate the other so much? Betty, I can understand. What am I? A pauper, an outcast, and Stephen is the heir to a vast empire, rich and successful. There's nothing to be gained by living with me. A shameful life of misery and misery. On the other hand, my husband's rich brother and father-in-law. That's where a child comes in handy. Tie it to you tightly and enjoy life. What about love? Come on, we're grown-up girls. More money, more love. I looked longingly at my grandfather. God, what am I still pouring it all in for? My companion showed no emotion. I nodded. One glass wasn't enough. I remembered Kathy. And there's the lie. The failed kidnapping and the beating. The fake love and the passionate breakup. And there I fell for it. I believed it. Oh, right. The Savior's a romantic asshole. She listened to me talking to the elephant and leaked everything. And they got confused. They made up a tale about a stolen daughter and lustful kidnappers. The daughter was played by a fellow craftswoman. Yes, it was clearly visible at the camp. A minx is a minx in the taiga. I didn't notice anything. Batman. I remembered when Kathy was taken in an alley in Yalta. Very natural. It was painful, but gentle. Yes, Kathy was genuinely in love, but not with me, with money. I wonder if he ever slept with her. Probably not. It wasn't his style to get involved with a trivial war. It was all set up from the start, except for the evil taiga creature And the wolves out there in the taiga. I was supposed to disappear forever, without a trace. No man, no problem. I remembered Camille's attentive gaze at our meeting in the restaurant, and his face was vaguely familiar to me. He'd missed the clue too, and he was a scout too. Thank God the elephant was real. Otherwise, I'd hang myself. I sat there trying to figure out what to do with all this. I felt like I was burning out inside. The door clicked, and a young woman entered the office. She walked through the office and stopped behind my grandfather's back. I looked questioningly into his eyes. Decide for yourself. My grandfather seemed to read my mind. There's a board meeting in half an hour. I think your presence is necessary. The owner and CEO of the steel mill stood up. Camille will help you pick out a suitable suit. Grandfather kissed his assistant's hand, showing me more than just a working relationship. Are you going to put me on the board of directors? To be honest, I was a little puzzled. Instead of who? You have no idea. Grandpa smiled for the first time in our conversation. It's for me. Did you decide to push your favorite grandson into a cushy position? I answered cheekily. That too. But not only that. Your father and your brother have been stealing. They opened fake accounts and transferred the company's money there. Good thing we managed to block their access to the main cash funds. Grandpa looked at his assistant. I stood up and headed for the door. The suit was picked up quickly. I put on a cream vivid shirt under my jacket and tied a dark blue tie. I stopped in front of the mirror. A glamorous office clerk looked back at me. Only the unusual ring on my right hand gave my image some mysterious individuality. In the hallway in front of the door leading to the small conference room, Stephen was excitedly circling. What do you want here? He hissed when he saw me. But I saw him in time. A glimpse. The disappointment in his eyes. Well, of course. It wasn't like I'd perished in the taiga. Unpleasant surprise. Camille ignored Stephen's hiss and opened the door. Come in, Christopher. Everyone was already assembled. No one knew me, so many looked at me in surprise, confused by the table. Grandfather got up from his seat and took a few steps towards me. Gentlemen, let me introduce you to my grandson, Christopher. Have a seat. Grandfather pointed me to a vacant seat at the large round table and sat down in the chairman's chair again. I have a question. I heard my former father's voice. Why is there an outsider present at the board of directors? Indeed, the grandfather was not embarrassed. But we will correct this mistake now. Standing behind grandfather's chair, a young man put a blue folder and a pen on the table. This is a notarized document on the transfer of 51% of the shares of the concern to my grandson. The grandfather signed the document in front of him. Gentlemen, he continued, I propose to introduce Mr. Christopher to the board of directors of the company. The members of the board raised their hands in unison. One moment, gentlemen. My former father raised his voice. The number of members of the board is always constant and cannot change. According to the rules contained in the charter of the company, we cannot introduce a new person at this time. Indeed, smiled my grandfather. I propose to remove Mr. Sebastian from the board. I was sitting in a deep armchair behind a huge table on a leather sofa to the right of the table. It's a little early for you to take over the reins of the company, isn't it? And I'm still in my right mind. Grandpa laughed. There was a knock at the door. Camille put a plate of fruit and a bottle of cognac on the coffee table. Camille, stay. Grandfather looked at his assistant. She smiled and sat down on the edge of the sofa. To be honest, I was a bit tense about the relationship between my grandfather and his assistant. Who is she, his mistress? That was the first thing that came to mind when looking at their relationship. But isn't she a little young for my grandfather? It was as if my grandfather read my mind. Camille is the daughter of an old friend of mine. He died tragically with his wife. A quarter of a century ago, Camille was taken away to a boarding school. Grandfather stroked the young woman's hand affectionately. I tracked her down, took her in and adopted her. She's been with me ever since. I was a little taken aback. Camille looked at me and blushed. Young man, this is not silver. The old jeweler pursed his lips. It's platinum. I must tell you the ring is very old, but you understand me. See for yourself. Boris Isakovich handed me the lupa. I trust you completely. I politely put the instrument on the table. Can you give me an approximate time of manufacture? Well, early 17th century. That's when rings like this were becoming fashionable. It was made by a good jeweler. Fine workmanship. By the way, the enamel is English of the period. So your ring was made in Europe, England or Scotland, most likely. I'd like to know who it belonged to and how it ended up in eastern Siberia, I asked, and put the ring on my finger. Alas, I do not know that. The old jeweler spread his hands. Well, are you ready? I looked at the elephant quite. When the elephant finished chewing. At that moment, the cell phone rang. The helicopter made a circle over its cold waters and began to descend to the rocky shore. The rotating blades swayed the tops of the spruce and pine trees growing along the shore. I was the first to jump on the ground. Then I took my wife in my arms. She flatly refused to let me go alone. The elephant handed me backpacks and weapons, waved to the pilot, and jumped out onto the rocky beach. The helicopter hovered over the shore for a while, then went sharply upward and rushed along the river. Soon the sound of its engine faded around a corner and a motor slipped out of nowhere. It turned toward the shore and soon jabbed its nose into the coastal sand. A man sitting in the stern jumped into the water and pulled the boat to shore. "Good afternoon. How did you get here?" He smiled welcomingly. We shook hands and began to load the equipment. "Well, let's go." I hugged and kissed Camille.